Check this out. I'm Luis, the absolute bottom of the barrel son of Duke Calvin. 3 months ago, I got completely flattened by a truck and woke up in a whole new world. A world packed with knights, empires, and frost giants. Sounds bloody awesome, right? Yeah, nah. My old man banished me up north to develop some freezing. Empty wasteland right out near the border. It's dangerous, freezing cold, and literally nobody reckons I'll make it out alive. He tossed me a bit of gold, some rations, a handful of nights, and basically told me to bugger off forever. I was stuck in this rattly old carriage, freezing my ass off and feeling sorry for myself, when something absolutely insane happened. A voice just rang out in my head. I suddenly had this daily intelligence system feeding me info every single day. Handy stuff, like where to scavenge resources, heads-ups on danger, and even the darkest secrets of the blokes around me. The first batch of messages rolled in straight away. Most of it was just juicy gossip. Some prince getting offed in the capital, my old man having another kid. But there were 2 messages that actually mattered. First, a school of crystal cod shows up at dawn. They're dead set valuable. Their bones buff up knights and fetch an absolute fortune. That was my first real shot at getting ahead. But the second message, that one chilled me right to the bone. Pay close attention to this. One of my own knights, a bloke named Roy, spiked my soup with poison. A guy my own family assigned to protect me was trying to take me out before we even got there. Without the system, I would have slurped down that soup and been dead by tonight, but now I had the upper hand. I stepped out of the carriage real quiet, looked at the bubbling pot, then at the knights patiently waiting for me to eat first, and I just smiled. Finally, I had an ace up my sleeve in this brutal, frozen world. I grabbed the bowl of soup, brought it right up to my lips, but then I stopped. I handed it straight over to Roy and ordered him to drink it. All the color instantly drained right out of his face. He started making excuses, stammering about how the Lord should eat first, but I gave him a hard, direct order. When he refused again, Captain Lambert and the boys realized something was dodgy. They completely surrounded Roy and shoved the bowl in his face. Roy panicked and tried to make a run for it, but they tackled him to the dirt. Now everyone knew the soup was laced. I asked him who put him up to it. He cracked instantly and spilled his guts. It was my older brother, Benjamin. He wanted me dead so I couldn't make a play for the family title. Benjamin promised Roy a promotion and a one-way ticket back south if he did the job. Roy was bawling, begging for mercy, claiming he was just following orders from the top, but there was no way I was letting a backstabber live. I gave Lambert the nod, one clean swing of his sword, and it was over. The whole camp went dead silent after that. I could see it in their eyes. They were terrified, not just because of what happened to Roy, but because the harsh reality finally hit them. They didn't want to be here either. They were shipped up north because their families couldn't care less about them, just like mine. Can you imagine being stuck in that situation? So I gave them a choice. I told them anyone who wanted to bail could pack up and leave right then and there. I'd even write them a letter to keep them out of trouble with the brass. But after tonight, going AWOL would mean a death sentence. Nobody even flinched. They knew heading back wasn't safe anyway. So I spoke straight from the heart. I gave it to them straight. We were all thrown away by people who thought we were worthless garbage, but that didn't make it true. These blokes earned their stripes with blood, sweat, and fighting on the actual front lines. The ones who dumped us out here were the real cowards, kicking back in their massive comfy castles. I told them to picture what could happen if we actually pulled this off. If we built something real out here in this frozen wasteland. I promised them, if we survived, I'd split absolutely everything with them. Some could become viscounts, maybe even earls. For a moment, it was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then Lambert dropped to one knee, slammed his fist to his chest, and swore his loyalty to me. One by one, the rest of the boys did the exact same thing, standing out there in the freezing cold, looking down at my knights. I could feel the tide turning. We weren't just a bunch of rejects anymore. We were a proper squad, and we were going to fight tooth and nail for our future. By the very next morning, I could already spot a massive difference in the lads. After last night's speech in a nice, poison-free bowl of soup, they were moving with a real spring in their step. Some were even double-checking their gear without me having to say a word. Others were already making plans for conquering the north. It was a bloody good sign. But I knew just talking a big game wouldn't keep them fired up forever. I needed to give them something real, something they could actually hold on to. And thanks to my intelligence system, I knew exactly where to find it. I marched the whole crew out to a frozen river, about 3 kilometers to the west. My men stared at the thick ice, thinking I'd completely lost the plot. What about you? Want to see how we catch fish under solid ice? Stick with me, mates, 'cause we're about to witness something bloody epic. While the others were having a laugh, Lambert backed me up and smashed through that ice. The rest followed his lead. Soon enough, the ice gave way, and freezing, dark water bubbled up. We chucked in a net, and the rope went taut in seconds. A bright silver fish shot out, thrashing around on the ice. Then another, and another. We hauled up 12 northern crystal cods in total. Their scales were gleaming under the morning sun. They looked like absolute jewels. One of the knights recognized the rare catch. He yelled out that these were extraordinary fish, capable of purifying the blood and multiplying any warrior's strength. That grabbed everyone's attention straight away. That's when I handed over half the haul to them. I swear some of the blokes nearly burst into tears. These were men tossed aside by their own families, and here I was, sharing a luxury that not even the richest nobles had ever tasted. We whipped up a fish stew over the campfire. As it boiled, it took on this weird, pearly white color, silvery and almost glowing. When it was done, I took the first sip to give them some confidence. After that, they all drank it down without a second thought. The effect was instant. A fierce heat rushed right through my body. I felt my blood completely clear out. I felt so much lighter. Now pay close attention, 'cause what happens next is absolute madness. They all focused. A young apprentice started giving off a faint silver glow. He had leveled up, from an apprentice to a fully fledged knight. Just like that. Then a second apprentice evolved. The camp absolutely erupted. 2 promotions from just one bowl of soup. Down south, that kind of progress would cost years of training and an absolute fortune in resources. Every knight who drank got stronger. Even the ones who didn't level up were looking at me like I was some sort of messiah. They didn't know a thing about my system. They just reckoned the gods had blessed me. But what really won them over wasn't the fish. It was sharing it. Nobody had ever treated them with that much respect in their entire lives. They started chanting my name out there in that frozen wasteland. This time, I knew for a fact their loyalty was 100% dead set real. After the feed, I sat down to practice the tide breathing technique, a secret method from my family. I focused completely. I could feel the energy from the crystal cod cleaning my blood and warming me right down to the bone. When I finished, boom, I had already advanced to a mid-level officer. Sounds impressive. But in my family, that's nothing. My older brother is a famous knight across the whole empire. The ranks go from apprentice up to combat officer. Then elite, transcendent, supreme and finally legendary. I was still stuck at the basic level, but zero stress. My daily intelligence system guaranteed new opportunities. When I opened my eyes, the knights started cheering for me all over again. It felt bloody incredible. Their loyalty was rock solid now. I asked Lambert how far it was to Frostspear, the northern capital, about 200 kilometers in total. Normally it would take 5 or 6 days, but I ordered them to pick up the pace and get there in 3. With morale this high, I knew we could pull it off. And you and I both know why we were in such a rush. The system gave me 3 alerts. First, in 3 days, a young bloke named Weir would show up as a slave in the black market. He had the potential to be a top-tier knight, super rare talent. Those elite knights were the absolute backbone of any kingdom. I couldn't let someone like that slip away. Second alert. An alchemist apprentice named Silco. He nicked a secret formula from the Golden Essence Guild and was hiding among the slaves to make his getaway. Alchemists were literally the mad scientists of this world. They turned absolute rubbish into pure gold. Even my powerful family only had 3 of them. Snagging an apprentice would be an insane pickup for me. The plan was simple. Buy them both at the market before anyone figured out what they were really worth. And the third big piece of news, Duke Edmund, the governor of the whole North, was absolutely furious. All the useless noble kids were getting dumped in his territory. I don't blame the bloke. The Empire demanded strong young men to protect the border, but every family was just sending their absolute worst scum. On paper, I was one of them. Edmund had sacrificed everything to crush a rebellion 2 years ago. His army, even his own son. Trust me, mates. You're going to want to see what happens next. Stick with me for this story. Instead of proper backup, they just sent him a bunch of lazy, spoilt noble kids. The reports confirmed the other noble kids were heading up north, and honestly, none of them looked like anything special. My file probably said the exact same thing, but I absolutely loved that they were all completely underestimating me. While they saw me as just a useless 8th son, I had a system that spilled all the secrets, plus some bloody loyal knights. The lower the expectations, the bigger my advantage. We pushed hard and made it to Frostland in 3 days. As we rocked up to the gates, the guards spotted us straight away. Over 40 knights were marching through, with the Crimson Moon banner flying high. I introduced myself as Louise Calvin and told him I was there to see Duke Edmund. The Calvin name still carried a hell of a lot of weight round here. A middle-aged officer quickly escorted us inside. The city was pretty rough. Wide streets, sure, but absolutely full of potholes, covered in snow and mud. Almost all the stone and timber buildings were falling to pieces. The locals looked totally dead inside, just absolutely knackered. Battered soldiers and everyday citizens just scraping by. Not a pretty sight. But considering all the bloody wars and rebellions in this place, it was a miracle it was still standing. They took us to a basic office, some old shelves, and a banner. And right behind that desk, pay close attention to this bit. Duke Edmund had a massive scar and an absolutely terrifying presence. This bloke had fought in actual wars and lost his own son defending the North. He looked me up and down, absolutely 0% impressed. He had a go at me, comparing me to my famous older brother, but I didn't even flinch. Up here, strength is everything, and I was still weak. Keeping my cool, I handed over my royal papers. I was there to pick out my territory. He rolled out this massive map. The northern province was absolutely gigantic, almost half the size of Russia from my past life. There were areas marked in red as off-limits, but everything else was up for grabs. Since I got there before the other nobles who were too chicken to face the north, I had the luxury of picking first. I'd been prepping for exactly this big moment. Lately, my systems intel had been feeding me some bloody crucial info. I compared locations, hunting for the best spot. I knew exactly what I wanted. You're probably wondering what I picked. I pointed straight at Greenrock Gorge near the Frostal Fjord, and Edmund was absolutely gobsmacked. It was the best spot in the entire north. Warmer temps where you could actually grow crops, a freshwater creek, decent fishing, and veins of iron right below the surface. In this freezing wasteland, it was practically a gold mine. He sized me up again, completely rethinking his first impression. He praised my choice, reckoned the North might actually have a chance if everyone had my eye for an opportunity. He stamped my paperwork with the official Frostland emblem. That land was officially mine. I played it cool, but on the inside I was screaming. He had no idea my system had showed me secrets nobody else knew about. If he'd known what it was really worth, he never would have handed it over, but he was clueless, and now it belonged to me. I claimed 300 square kilometers and named it the Crimson Tide Territory, in honor of our family crest, and as a nod to my past life. To Edmund, it was just a slightly better patch of frozen dirt. But my system showed me the truth. The rivers had massive fish migrations, basically unlimited food. The ground was hiding geothermal springs, something completely unheard of in this freezing north. They warmed up the soil for farming and made 100% natural hot springs. While everyone else was freezing their asses off, I'd be chilling in a hot bath. Believe me, the real treasure was buried deep underground. There was standard cold iron, and right on the edge of my land, a hidden vein of something called magic marrow. It was like the sulfur from my world, the key ingredient for whipping up explosives. I just wasn't that strong yet. Stick with me through this madness. I'm going to use this today to change absolutely everything. Just picture it, using explosives against actual royal knights. Just thinking about it sent shivers down my spine, but before I left Edmund's office, I had one last card to play. My knights lugged in 2 chests. Inside the first one were 3 crystal cod, their silver scales absolutely gleaming. Edmund's eyes nearly popped right out of his head, even the governor of the North. Dot rarely managed to get his hands on these fish, and his daughter was right on the verge of becoming an elite knight. These fish would give her that final push she needed. I told him those first 3 were a straight-up gift. Then I cracked open the second chest. 3 more cod, but these ones were for bargaining. Edmund just laughed, calling me a pretty crafty bloke. He asked what I wanted for them. I didn't beat around the bush. People, soldiers, tradies and knights. I needed the lot. We haggled back and forth. 0 veterans. But he offered up 120 fresh recruits. 30 tradies, and after twisting his arm a bit, an apprentice knights and 3 full-fledged knights. Their ultimate loyalty would stay with the North, but they'd follow my orders. I shook his hand on it. It was a ripper deal. Way better than I'd hoped for. Honestly, Edmund was a tough nut to crack, but fair enough in the end. As I was heading off, he suggested I swing by the slave market to pick up some handy workers. He even sent an officer along with me so the merchants wouldn't rip me off. I thanked him and headed out. Now, pay close attention to this bit. That market was absolutely crucial to my plan. 2 vital people were waiting for me there. We're the future elite knight. And Silco, the runaway alchemist. I already had the land, the resources, and the manpower. It was finally time to snag my hidden treasures from the East Market of Frost City. The place was rough as guts, wooden stalls draped in tarps, with the stench of animal pelts and roasted meat hanging in the freezing air. It used to be just a tiny little trading post, but after the empire expanded, merchants flooded the place, looking to make a quick buck off the new lords. Right at the back was the market. Technically, the whole setup was totally illegal, but out here in the brutal North, nobody gave a toss. Rows of people were standing behind wooden fences, skinny, pale, and dressed in absolute rags. Most of them kept their heads down, like they'd already given up on life altogether. A few still had a bit of fire in their eyes, but a quick crack of the merchant's whip sorted that out fast. One merchant spotted me and came jogging over with this massive, fake grin, showing off his quote-unquote products like they were just bloody cattle. He pointed out some strong young blokes, promising they'd work like oxen, even hinting at other shady services. I shut that down immediately. I wasn't there just to browse. I was looking for two very specific people. Soon enough, my eyes locked onto a young boy, tiny and scrawny, huddled up in a woman's arms, absolutely shaking with fear. Nobody else would give him a second glance. You'd probably ignore him too, wouldn't ya? But my system was telling me that this was Weir, a kid with top-tier knight potential. Someday this terrified little kid could turn into the kind of warrior who completely turns the tide of war. Then I spotted target number 2. A scrawny bloke hiding right at the back of the miserable crowd, with messy grey hair covering his face, trying his best to fly under the radar. That was Silco, the apprentice alchemist on the run from the Golden Essence Guild. He looked like just another broken slave. But to me, he was my future alchemist. The men were going for 8 silver, while women and kids were 4. Since I had the governor's officer backing me up, the merchant didn't even try to rip me off. I bought every single one that merchant had, over 380 people. Then I grabbed another 120 on top of that. A grand total of 500 slaves for 380 gold coins. That was nearly half my bloody fortune. After that, I stocked up on tucker, seeds, farming tools, and weapons. Everything cost twice as much, as it did south. By the time I was done, I only had 68 gold coins left to my name. Yeah, it stung, but I absolutely needed it all for my territory. Over those few days, I also ran into some of the other nobles who'd been sent up north. They were exactly what I expected, dead set useless. Some were just drinking themselves stupid in the pubs. Others sat around looking miserable, cursing the emperor and whining about their families. Not a single one of them had a real plan. I just smiled, kept my mouth shut, and went about my business. But hey, that's not our problem. That morning, I rode out through the city gates. Trust me, what happens next is absolutely brutal. Come with me. Behind me marched almost 1,000 people, knights and soldiers, artisans and slaves, all heading to the southeast border, right towards the Crimson Tide territory, my brand new land. I gave the word, and we moved out. We set up camp by the road, cooking up hot porridge for absolutely every single person there. The slaves clutched their wooden bowls, so incredibly bloody grateful just to have something hot to eat. Most of them had their whole lives begging for scraps, so a simple bowl of porridge felt like absolute luxury. My cook, George, was stressing out. He reckoned we'd run completely out of tucker if I kept feeding everyone so generously. I told him to quit whinging and just cook. He just didn't get it. I knew for a fact that endless resources were waiting for me in my territory. We were going to be more than fine. Then my daily intelligence report came through. The first 2 updates weren't exactly urgent. Some bloke on the border froze to death after getting too pissed, and the governor's daughter got bumped up to elite knight. Interesting enough, but not my bloody problem. But get a load of this. The third message had me proper on edge. 70 starving ice wolves were just waiting to ambush us. They'd caught a whiff of our hot grub and were already plotting a strike. I wasn't scared. My knights were incredibly tough, but if those wolves caught us off guard, we were definitely going to lose a lot of good people. So I called Lambert over and sent out scouting parties to check out the canyon. They came back quick with hard-proof claw marks in the snow and wild tracks absolutely everywhere. Those wolves were starving and desperate. I decided right then to turn their little death trap into ours. I got the boys to set up wooden stakes right across the canyon and hid archers up on the ridges, ready to fire. It worked an absolute treat. The wolves crept through the snow, almost invisible in their grey coats, but the second the pack leaders hit the traps, lethal spikes shot up from the ground, absolutely shredding them. The whole pack just went into absolute panic. My archers let loose, completely wiping them out. Then Lambert charged in with the cavalry. It was a bloody brilliant sight. Knights leaping through the air, weapons glowing with this furious red energy. slicing through wolves like it was nothing. The whole brutal fight was over in a flash. 70 wolves, completely annihilated, and we barely copped a scratch. The only dicey moment was with the Wolf King. This massive beast that stood his ground while the rest of his pack tried to bolt. He launched himself straight at Lambert with absolutely everything he had. But Lambert just dodged, charged up his sword, and finished him off with one fatal strike. We gathered up the loot, 70 thick pelts, sharp fangs, and heaps of wolf meat. I gave the order to skin the wolves and dish out all the meat as an extra feed. The troops were absolutely stoked. Out in this freezing wasteland, hot meat was a massive luxury. I could see a massive shift in the eyes of the fresh recruits. It wasn't just blind obedience anymore. It was genuine, absolute respect for me. I warned him about the incoming danger before it hit, set up a master trap, pulled off a flawless, clean victory, and then shared all the spoils right back with them. See that? That's how you earn pure loyalty. Not with empty words, but with hard results. After a few grueling days on the road, we finally rocked up to the Crimson Tide territory. Gotta be honest, my first impression of the joint was pretty bloody grim. It was completely flat, empty and dead set desolate. You could barely spot a single sad blade of grass. A knight from the south muttered about how awful it looked. I didn't argue. At first glance, he seemed spot on, but I knew damn well that wasn't the whole story. My intelligence system had already spilled the beans on everything hiding beneath this barren dirt, so I got straight to work. I ordered the men to get the tents pitched quick smart, and to scout the river for fresh water. They needed to start chopping timber for future builds and clear out an urgent military training ground. The loud crack of axes and shouting voices completely shattered the silence. For the very first time, this dead land actually felt alive. Over the next few days, I made it my mission to explore every single corner of my territory. Down in the deep south, I found steam just billowing out of the ground, right where the snow had completely melted away. I crouched down and could feel the intense heat radiating straight from the dirt. Geothermal vents, exactly where my system said I'd bloody find 'em. Out here in the freezing cold. This underground heat was an absolute goldmine. It could warm up heaps of houses and massively boost our crop growth. And even better, I found natural hot springs just around the corner. Right then and there, I decided I was building my manor right next to 'em. While those other border lords are freezing their asses off in their tents, I'll be soaking in a hot bath. Not bad at all for an exiled noble. After that, I checked out the river. The ice was starting to crack up, and you could already see a few birds snagging little fish. It wasn't much, but trust me, my system. Come along. Let's watch an empire rise. Come spring, that river would be absolutely teeming with fish, guaranteeing a steady supply of food. But his scouts came back with even more explosive news. They found cold iron up in the northwest mountains, and deeper inside, a mysterious mineral glowing a deep dark red. Magic mineral essence. Lambert just about lost his bloody mind when he heard that. That magic essence was worth an absolute fortune. But our boy played it cool. He already knew. He knew it, but he was also well aware they had absolutely no way to mine it yet. That massive treasure buried under the snow would just have to wait. The hardest part of the trek was visiting the locals' settlement. It was just heartbreaking. Mud everywhere. And this awful, rotting stench. The crooked little huts looked ready to cave in at any second. The folks living there were mostly the elderly, women and kids, wearing absolute rags that did nothing to block out this hellish weather. The last bloke in charge just bolted, leaving them completely stranded to fend for themselves. These bone-thin kids were hiding behind a door, staring up at him with pure terror in their eyes. He pulled some dried rations from his pocket and gently offered it to them. At first, they were way too terrified to even step out. When they finally took it, they scarfed it down with such desperation, like they were terrified the food would just vanish into thin air. But this one little bloke didn't eat. He tucked his rations straight into his battered coat. When asked why, he answered in this shaky little voice that he wanted to save it for his mum. That moment hit him right in the guts. Can you even believe it? Down south, the stray dogs were eating better meat than this poor kid. It was an absolute bloody outrage. He stood up and called all the locals together. Anyone who was keen to work could come back to his camp. He promised them food and a proper roof over their heads, but they just stared back with blank, skeptical eyes. They had been let down way too many times to trust anyone that easily, but after seeing the kids actually eat, they slowly started nodding and agreed to tag along. They figured things couldn't possibly get any worse, and he was dead set on making sure things actually got better. He pulled up on a small hill, looking out over the massive stretch of land below. This was the spot he'd picked for his first major settlement. It sat right near a geothermal hot spring, keeping the ground nice and warm, and the hill completely blocked out the worst of the freezing winds. It was just perfect for building. Mike, his head builder, asked him if they should kick things off by building a proper castle. He shot that down straight away. Housing for the people came first. When Mike asked where he was going to live, he told him he would be bunking right there with everyone else. Mike just stared at him in shock, but he was dead serious. They were all in this together. He designed the houses himself, mashing up the local northern style with those Viking longhouses he remembered so clearly from his past life. Every single house was dug a third of the way into the ground to trap the heat. The walls were made of timber frames woven with willow branches, dry grass, and mud tough. Warm and super quick to throw up. Mike was absolutely blown away. He reckoned his lord was some sort of natural-born architect. But just between you and me, he simply had the cheat sheet of two different worlds. Construction kicked off straight away. Teams of 20 people were working flat out, 2 soldiers managing a crew of 18 slaves and refugees. That frozen ground was absolutely brutal. Every single strike with the shovel sent a massive shock right up their arms, so he actually grabbed a shovel himself. He would dig away at different spots on the site for about 10 minutes, have a yarn with the crew, and then head straight over to the next group. He wasn't trying to do the job for them. He just wanted everyone to see that he didn't think he was better than any of them. Look, when the Lord himself is out there, sweating in the dirt, absolutely nobody has an excuse to have a whinge. He kept it casual as he walked around, telling them stuff like, the framing is looking really solid, reminding them to slap on a bit more mud or they would freeze at night, promising them hot soup because they were on the home stretch. Just little things, but they meant the absolute world to everyone. Morale just skyrocketed wherever he went. In a matter of days, the very first batch of houses was completely finished. They looked like these tiny little hills popping up out of the snow, with roofs covered in thick grass and mud. They blended straight into the frozen landscape. Super basic on the outside, but nice and toasty and dry on the inside. For the freezing north, these were honestly the best homes anyone could ever ask for. With the settlement really taking shape, he decided it was time for a massive celebration. He needed to win over their hearts, not just fill their bellies. That very night, they lit this massive bonfire right out in the middle of the open field. Almost 1,000 people gathered around it. Former slaves, northern locals, rescued travelers, soldiers and knights from all walks of life. Every single one of them now belonged to the Crimson Tide territory. He hopped up onto a huge rock in front of the fire and started to speak to them. And that is where we will leave it for today. Guys, he told them this celebration was to honor their very first homes, and that from now on, they were the true owners of this land. Get a load of this. Not a single person clapped. They just stared at me, completely baffled. The word masters meant absolutely nothing to people who only knew how to follow orders. I reckon some of them actually thought this whole celebration was just some twisted punishment ceremony. Their trust was completely shattered. Honestly, I was expecting exactly that kind of reaction. Just flapping my gums wasn't going to change a thing on its own, so I moved on to the next phase. The rewards. I called up Silco, my loyal new butler. Yep, that alchemist apprentice I bought at the slave market started reading off a list of names. It was a list of the absolute hardest workers and the most loyal folks from the last few days. But when they heard their names, they didn't step up with pride. They were shaking with absolute terror. A few of them even tried to drop to their knees straight away and beg for mercy in the dirt. Going by their painful pasts, getting singled out by a noble meant only one of two things: a harsh beating or death. They didn't have the faintest clue what was actually about to happen. The slaves who got called out stepped forward, shaking in their boots. Now, pay close attention to what I did here. I kept the whole thing super simple. I told them they'd been working their guts out to help build up our territory, and now they were going to get exactly what they deserved. I snatched the slave contracts right out of Silco's hands and chucked them straight into the bonfire. From today, you are no longer slaves. You are truly free people. For one whole second, absolutely nobody breathed. Then the place just erupted. People were screaming, bawling their eyes out, and collapsing to the ground. One bloke with a really weathered face dropped to his knees and smashed his forehead into the freezing dirt so hard he started bleeding heavily. They were calling me their great savior. One young woman just covered her face, looked up at me, and sobbed. An old mate stood up, hands shaking, like he was in the middle of a prayer, pure unadulterated freedom. For folks treated like nothing but objects their entire lives, that word meant the absolute world. The slaves who didn't get called up were staring with wide eyes, absolutely gutted that they hadn't worked harder. So I gave them something even bigger, a promise. I announced that every single month, more than 10 slaves who contributed to the territory would officially earn their freedom, a proper chance. Put in the hard yards, and anyone could be free. Anyone could even own their own piece of land one day. That news completely broke them. One by one, they dropped to their knees, screaming, "Great Lord," over and over again, until it became this deafening roar echoing out under the night sky. These were folks who had been completely numb and broken for years on end, and now they were finally alive again, just because somebody gave them a bit of hope. You felt that, didn't you? Even my youngest knights were absolutely gobsmacked by the sheer power of a simple promise. Standing up there on that freezing rock, I felt the massive weight of it all. Deep down, I knew damn well that slavery was wrong and had to end, but I couldn't just free them all in one go. That caused absolute chaos. Setting up a solid reward system made way more sense. Freeing people bit by bit would keep everyone super motivated, letting the territory grow nice and fast. Honestly, free citizens and slaves wouldn't be living all that differently under my rule out here anyway. Everyone's harvest went straight into a shared stockpile that I managed myself. But having those two different status levels gave them a bloody good reason to push themselves. After that, I turned around to face my soldiers and knights. I popped open a bunch of wooden chests packed with thick leather armor and warm boots, up here in the north, where everyone was freezing and dead broke. Decent gear was worth way more than pure gold. The soldiers rushed in to grab their kit with massive grins on their faces. Genuine leather armor, and those boots, easily the best in the entire north. They honestly couldn't believe it. Heaps of them had been out on patrol with busted boots and absolutely freezing feet. Now they finally had the right gear. I bought the whole lot in Frostland City ahead of time, all because my system told me exactly what they needed most. And after the gifts, it was time for the massive feast. They brought out roasted meats, perfectly golden and dripping with delicious juices for everyone. Everyone got a massive feed, right down to the lowest-ranking slaves. Some poor blokes were crying just from tasting real meat for the first time in years. Then the music kicked off. Some nomads started playing a bone flute, and the women started dancing around the massive bonfire. The soldiers were cracking up, competing to see who was the worst dancer. The kids were running around in packs, finally getting to just be normal kids for a change. I watched the whole thing from the highest rock, the dancing, the laughs, the happy tears. Every single one of these people had put their hope in me. Every last one of them was counting on me to keep them breathing, and to build something actually worth living for out in this harsh, freezing wasteland. There was no way I was going to let him down, so I put Silco, or Hilco as he reckons he prefers to be called now, straight to work. No breaks. I ordered him to go around and survey every single person in my territory to figure out exactly what they were actually good at. He definitely wasn't a fan of the idea. He whinged quite a bit, but he got it done. And trust me, what Silco couldn't even begin to guess was that we already knew every single one of his dark little secrets. Stick around, mate, because we are about to see how my system spilled the beans on his actual backstory. He used to be an alchemy apprentice back in the Golden Core Guild, over in the Jade Federation. Some real shady bloke hired him to pinch a top-secret formula off his own master, but the whole thing went pear-shaped. He had to nick the whole document since it was way too hard to memorize. His master clocked the theft straight away, and they came after him. They chucked a bounty on his head. Freaking out, Silco dressed up as a slave and legged it up north with some smugglers. But those smugglers, absolute bloody animals. Every time he acted up, they would whip him raw. In the end, he just gave up and played the part of a regular slave. His living nightmare finally wrapped up at the black market in the Frostlands, which is exactly where I bought him. He figured he was in for another hellhole, but once I realized he could read and do maths, I set him free and made him my head butler. I could tell he was massively confused. I mean, a noble sharing grub with slaves and tossing their contracts in the fire. He muttered once that I seemed more like a priest than a lord. I knew bloody well he was plotting to sneak off. Pay close attention here. In his own head, he was this grand alchemist, not some sad, run-of-the-mill number cruncher. I wasn't sweating it, though he had absolutely nowhere to run, and he was way too handy to lose right now. When he finally dropped the finished census on my desk, he looked absolutely dead on his feet. Top-notch work, though. The handwriting wasn't perfect, but the whole thing was organized flawlessly. Names, skills, and ages. He even chucked in notes about who could barely light a fire, and which of the young ones were proper good at hunting. He was an absolute natural at this gig, so I figured I would just keep playing dumb about his big secret. If I called him out, he might just shut down or try to bolt. And right now, I needed a highly capable assistant way more than I needed some runaway apprentice. Our territory didn't even have proper buildings set up yet. What good was focusing on alchemy gonna do me? And honestly, if I lost Silco, I would end up buried under a massive mountain of paperwork. Yeah, nah, no thanks. So I kept my trap shut and cracked open the census book. The numbers gave me a good grin. I had 1,000 people. The vast majority of them were farmers and shepherds, but we had over 100 seasoned fishermen, plus dozens of hunters, blacksmiths, carpenters, and tanners. More than enough to get a self-sufficient community up and running. You reckon, a territory is basically a machine, and every single person is a bloody crucial cog in it. Imagine chucking a farmer in the forge, and a fisherman in a ditch. The whole thing grinds to a halt. But if you put people where they actually know what they are doing, the whole place runs like a dream. I had all the intel I needed. The next step was to sort everyone out and roll out a proper development plan. I sat down to map out the bright future of our territory. Crimson tight. Having a system feed me info was brilliant and all, But I could not just rely on that to feed 1,000 hungry mouths. We needed actual industries. I called Silco in and started barking orders. First up, fishing. I sent 100 fishermen down to the river to rig up some temporary docks. There weren't too many fish out there just yet. But once the water warmed up, massive schools of them would swim upstream to spawn. That catch was going to be our biggest source of food. Next, I wanted to set up fish farms, breeding cold water fish instead of just banking on wild catches. Second on the list, farming. Over 400 farmers got straight to work clearing out the land. I pointed out the geothermal spots on the map to Silco. We would use the hot springs to thaw out the soil and set up an irrigation system. The dirt wasn't exactly the most fertile in the world, but we could make it work. I went with rye and potatoes for our first crops, since they hold up real well against the cold. Plus, we barely had any livestock to our name. Just a few cows. Sheep and reindeer. I was planning to send a crew over to Frostland to buy up more animals and build a proper grazing zone. Number 3. Security. I had over 50 hunters patrolling our borders from the woods while they were out on their hunts. They would keep their eyes peeled for monsters and any sketchy strangers. Fourth, crafting. The tanners would knock together some winter gear, and the blacksmiths would forge all our farming tools. The chippies would keep building houses. I wanted them all based in a single workshop, training up apprentices and getting a proper production line going. Silco was scribbling down absolutely everything, barely managing to keep up with me. I could definitely tell his opinion of me was shifting fast. At first, he reckoned I was just some clueless noble, but between you and me, he just saw a proper leader in action, and the whole territory finally came to life. Come check out this absolute beauty. The hunters headed out, and the sound of hammers rang right across the camp. The earth was finally waking up, while the rest of the bitter north was still locked in solid ice. Our lands were the one massive exception. A week earlier, I'd given the order to channel hot water from the thermal springs straight into the paddocks to melt all the ice away, and it worked like an absolute charm. The soil turned incredibly soft and warm. It was something those poor northern farmers could never even dream of seeing in early spring. The locals were absolutely gobsmacked. They dropped to their knees, touching the dirt in pure awe. Sowing seeds this early around here was absolute madness, but I knew full well that the hot spring water was only ever a temporary fix for us. It was salt water. Overdoing it would definitely end up absolutely wrecking our lands. Someday we'd build proper greenhouses. But for now, this gave us an edge that absolutely nobody else had. My new head farmer was a bloke named Mick. Before this, he was just a slave that everyone completely ignored. But my system flagged him as someone with an absolute powerhouse talent for farming. He had a dead-set perfect instinct for the soil and the weather. When I handed him his freedom and this gig, the poor bloke couldn't even string a sentence together. He just got straight to work. Come sowing day, Mick checked over the whole plot and gave us the green light. Hundreds of farmers sank their plows in, absolutely blown away by how incredibly soft the dirt was. A few of them even felt the intense heat rising right up from the ground. We scattered a very special fertilizer he'd whipped up from animal and human manure, mixed in well with straw. Fish guts and gravel dust. It stank like absolute death, making our eyes water and burn, but not a single person whinged about it. Everyone knew this was the difference between a bumper crop and starving to death. Mick confirmed we'd be planting in 4 days. Everything was tracking exactly to plan. Now pay close attention here. I left the fields, and it wasn't because of the foul stench, but because my system hit me with 3 urgent alerts that needed sorting right away. This time, my daily system drop handed me 3 pieces of info that were worth their weight in gold. First up, the dreaded leader of the Cold Moon tribe. Those barbarians who'd been raiding our empire for years had been poisoned and just carked it. His tribe was going to nosedive straight into a civil war. This was going to shake up the whole region, but I was still way too weak to do anything about it. For now, all I could do was grind to get stronger and brace myself for when the massive storm hit. Second, there was a pack of ice wolves chilling out at the blue cliff. Almost all of them were pups, which was absolutely massive for us. You can never tame adult ice wolves, but pups raised from scratch, they'd turn into dead loyal war beasts. I was 100% sure they were the orphans from the pack we wiped out on our way up here. If we managed to wrangle those pups, the Crimson Tide territory would soon have its very own wolf riders. I know you reckon that S awesome. But listen to this. A merchant named Jack was selling regular seeds, but hiding dozens of frozen blood crimson vines in the mix. It's an incredibly rare mutant plant, packed with pure magic that could completely supercharge a knight's bloodline. Growing it on a massive scale would make it the most valuable resource on my land. The only catch was that the icy land city was way too far away for me to get there in time. So I sent Lambert with 2 elite knights on the fastest horses we had. They had strict orders to beat everyone else there and buy absolutely every last seed off Jack before anyone else could. Figuring I might as well try my luck, I wrote a letter to my old man asking for some cash. I highly doubted that cold old Duke would give us stuff, but it was definitely worth a shot. Even a little bit of gold could massively fast-track our development. I sealed it up and let Lambert deliver it using our family's massive trade network. First thing the next morning, I led a crew of hunters and knights out to the blue cliff to snag those precious wolf pups. My headhunter, AG, had already sent scouts out the night before. They confirmed the wolves had lost their alpha and were just fighting amongst themselves. There were only a few old females left and about 20 pups hiding away in the dark, rocky caves. It was the absolute perfect moment. We quickly split into 2 crews. The first group, knights on horseback, dragged some fresh deer meat and blood right near the entrance to lure out the adults. And it worked. 5 wolves chased the bait. Trust me, you are going to want to see this. The knights lured them away from the den. Then they spun right around and wiped them out in a matter of minutes. After all, they were elite warriors, trained with pure battle energy. Stick around. This is where it gets bloody good. Those wolves didn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, I led the second squad straight inside. We lit our torches and crept forward in dead silence. The stench was absolutely intense, just pure wild animal. Completely feral. We found them right at the back, about 20 little pups huddled together, white as snow and shaking with absolute terror. The bravest of the lot tried to growl at us, but they were so tiny it was honestly more cute than anything else. We chucked some meat laced with sedative herbs right in front of them. The starving little mates pounced on the grub. It didn't take long for the herbs to kick in. They wobbled about, and then dropped into a dead sleep. I warned my hunters to be bloody careful. These weren't just your average mutts. They were the future wolves of the Crimson Territory. We needed them healthy and trusting. This was a long-term game plan. If we trained them right, one day they'd become our absolute best weapon. We hauled the pups back to base camp and popped them into a wooden pen we'd sorted out beforehand. It was nice and roomy, lined with dry grass and soft fur beds so they'd feel completely safe. Even so, the little guys were terrified. They huddled up close, baring their tiny fangs and glaring at us with wide eyes full of pure distrust. But one pup stood right out from the pack. He was bigger than the rest of them, with long legs and this proud stare that never once wavered. Now get a load of this. While the others cowered and whined, he stood his ground, staring us down. It confirmed my suspicions. This was the Wolf King's pup. I named him Lung Feng. I asked AG how we should go about taming them, partly just to hear his take, but mostly because I was testing the bloke. My system had told me he was a natural-born beast tamer, and I wanted to see it for myself. He didn't disappoint. He laid out a crystal-clear plan. win their trust with food, then establish dominance whenever they got protective of their grub or tried to bite back. And the most important bit, break Lung Feng in first. The pecking order means everything to them. If the alpha pup accepted me, the rest would fall right in line. Then he hit me with something pretty gutsy. He reckoned I had to be the one to tame Lung Feng myself. The hunters were a bit taken aback, but I absolutely loved his brutal honesty. Right then and there, I promoted him to head beast tamer for the territory. The old bloke dropped to his knees, fighting back tears. Just a few months ago, he was a homeless drifter on the brink of freezing to death. Now he had a real bloody purpose. While AG was sorting out the pups, I was making moves elsewhere. Lambert and his knights got to Frostland early and tracked down that seed merchant, Jack. Just some small-time southern merchant who'd trekked up to the freezing north dreaming of striking it filthy rich. Before Jack could even set up his stall, Lambert rocked up on horseback and bought out his entire stock for 5 gold coins. Do you see the absolute madness here? Jack was over the moon, totally clueless that he'd just sold off magical crimson seeds mixed in with plain old blueberries. Those sprouts alone were worth thousands of gold coins. If he ever found out, he'd probably bawl his eyes out. But hey, that sounds like a him problem, not a me problem. Lambert also dropped off my letter at the family's city office, hitting my old man up for some cash. I wasn't too sure if the old Duke would actually cough up the funds, but it was worth a shot. Meanwhile, the spring planting was going full throttle. I took a stroll through the paddocks, watching hundreds of peasants working the warm, fertilized soil. Wherever I walked past, they'd stop and bow, but not out of pure fear. Like they do in other noble territories, it was genuine respect. Those former slaves looked at me with something else. Hope. They wanted to prove themselves, desperately craving that long-awaited shot at freedom. I noticed all of it, but I kept a straight face. Honestly, I viewed my territory as one massive system. Slaves or free citizens, every single person had a role to play. The rewards kept them super motivated, and I had absolutely no plans to change how things ran until the time was right. Mick, my head of agriculture, strolled over grinning with a face covered in dirt. He confirmed the fertilizer was working perfectly and predicted a massive harvest. Looking out at that dark, rich soil across the plowed fields, I believed him 100%. Trust me, this is only just beginning. Wolves being tamed, rare seeds secured, crops growing, and my people working harder than ever. Everything was falling perfectly into place. Come along with me, because the Crimson Territory is finally becoming a reality. Mick confirmed the crop. Rye, turnips, and spuds. They grow crazy fast and can handle this brutal cold. Everything was going perfectly. In just 3 months, we'd have our first harvest of the season. Rye for flour, turnips for livestock feed, and spuds for emergencies. Nothing flashy, but it was an absolutely brilliant strategy. Once we nailed down the greenhouses, our crop variety was going to go through the roof. But right now, survival was the only priority. Watching the farmers work that dark soil out in the sun, I felt something I hadn't felt since crossing over into this world. Pure pride. This freezing wasteland was coming back to life through our hard work. But while we were growing, a new threat was brewing in the background. My intel network had just reported that the chief of the Cold Moon tribe had been poisoned. I hadn't even clocked how serious things really were yet. The chief's entire family was being completely wiped out. His wife and kids, murdered one by one. They stuck their heads on stone pillars as a sick, brutal warning. Now listen up, because this changes everything. Sif was the only one who made it out, all thanks to her brother Sigurd's sacrifice. He triggered his berserker blood rage, burning through his own life force just to buy her enough time to leg it down south. She was out there, galloping flat out through the snow, completely alone and being hunted down. I didn't know our paths were about to crash into each other yet, but the system always has a way of tying destinies together. Meanwhile, I had my own things to sort out. The western river in my territory was about to wake up. Every spring and autumn, the fish would swim upstream to spawn. The locals had always known about it. But their methods were dead set primitive. Spearing them with wooden sticks or using bamboo baskets, they barely caught enough for a feed. I put an end to all of that. Over the last 2 weeks, I had 100 blokes set up a proper commercial fishing operation. They hammered pylons into the bank to build a proper wharf, while the builders got to work on our new boats. 2 weeks later, we had 10 solid fishing boats ready to hit the water. Then, yesterday, my intel network finally dropped the news I'd been hanging out for. A massive school of fish was hitting tomorrow. I gave the order for all the boys to rally at the wharf. The next morning down by the water, I looked out at those 100 geared up blokes. I gave them a quick pump-up speech. I reminded them just how dead and empty this place was only a month ago. You guys can feel the hype too. Right, today, with our own 2 hands. We were going to prove that those awful days of starving were finally over. They hoisted their nets, cheering as one. My head of fishing, Luke, was standing next to me, sweating absolute bullets. He believed in me.
Mate, my predictions never missed.
But fishing is always way too bloody unpredictable. He was terrified that if we came back empty-handed, the boys would lose morale, and I might take my anger out on someone, probably him. I could see the sheer panic on his face, but I kept my cool. I trusted my system completely. The fish were incoming. I told Luke to kick things off. He took a massive breath and yelled out the order. The fishermen split up into 3 crews, exactly like we planned. The main crew took the 10 boats out to the middle, spreading massive nets across the water to form a huge, impenetrable wall. Everything was locked in. We just had to wait for the river to deliver. And mate, the whole op went absolutely perfectly. My 3 crews worked like absolute legends. The main group brought the 10 boats into a massive closed circle, trapping the fish inside. The second squad threw out smaller nets from the banks, scooping up anything close to shore. The third group, locals armed with spears and traps, locked down the rest, spearing fish in the shallows and setting traps along the riverbeds. Once those nets started filling up, the river literally exploded with life. Massive fat fish were thrashing against the nets, leaping up with their scales flashing in the sun. The boys were heaving with everything they had, the boats literally tipping from the weight. By the time we hauled in the last net, every single boat was overflowing with thrashing fish. The final count was over 3,000 caught. The wharf absolutely erupted. The blokes were yelling, cheering and laughing their heads off, barely able to believe the absolute madness of it all. Luke was looking at me like I was some kind of prophet. And trust me, mates, this is only just the beginning. Come along with me, 'cause I was bloody terrified all morning about coming back empty-handed and looking like an absolute mug. Now he was looking at me gobsmacked. I grinned, but I was already planning ahead. No way were we wasting this catch. First up, I set some strictly sustainable standards. We used wide mesh nets so the young fish could slip right through and grow. I capped the fish into certain hours a day and declared 1 day a week as a total rest day. 0 fishing across the whole territory. I'd seen the absolute disasters of overfishing in my old world. I wasn't going to bleed this river dry just for one good run. I also started planning out fish farms. I wanted to pick out the best fish for breeding and raise them in controlled waters. Wild fishing was brilliant and all, but relying purely on Mother Nature was a bit of a gamble. A proper farm would give us a dead-set reliable supply, no matter what went down. Looking at that massive mountain of fish piled up on the dock, I started wondering what the hell we were going to do with absolutely all of it. We were in Crimson Tide territory. This massive win deserved a proper blowout celebration. Not just the fishing, but everything we'd pulled off. When I first rocked up, this place was a dead, empty wasteland with folks who were completely shattered. Now we had houses, farms, boats, and a real community. Fishers, tradies, and soldiers. Every single one of them deserved a pat on the back. I decided to throw a massive feast. We'd use some of the fish for the bash, but the rest definitely had to be preserved. 3,000 fish would feed 1,000 folks for a fair few days, but winter was coming back. We'd need grub stocked up when the river froze over completely. Then a bloody brilliant idea hit me. Pay attention to this bit. A long-term preservation method from my old world that no one had even tried yet. I wanted to test it out straight away. By the Arvo. The sunset was bathed in the whole red tide territory in a warm, cozy light. Near the hot springs, a smokehouse had a bunch of fish hanging on wooden racks. The fish had this golden, slightly wrinkly skin, and gave off a strong but bloody delicious smoky smell. Luis was nearby, checking out the fish after hours of smoking. He gently pressed the surface with his fingers, pretty stoked with the dry, firm texture. Sally was standing next to him, wringing her hands and chatting nervously. She looked super worried that she hadn't done a decent job. Luis looked up and gave her some praise. The smoking is spot on. The texture and color of the fish are looking great. Sally sighed with relief and flashed a tiny, nervous smile. It's all thanks to your method. We never would have pulled it off without your expert guidance. You're really good with your hands, Louis said casually, tearing off a piece of fish and popping it straight into his mouth. Even though the fish meat was dry and tough, it had this rich smoky aroma. It slowly spread through your mouth as you chewed, and honestly, the flavor was pretty damn good. Jiraco, sitting there with his arms crossed, let out a tired yawn. The massive bags under his eyes practically covered his whole face, dragging down his cheeks. Not that Luis had forced him to work, but who else in the entire territory knew how to read and write besides him? So he had no choice but to begrudgingly pull some seriously long shifts. Today, to cheer the poor bloke up a bit, Luis brought him over to eat some fish. Hey, try this out. Luis casually tossed him a smoked fish. Jiraco's tired eyes showed a spark of interest, and he took a bite. Tastes way better than I reckoned it would. This is all thanks to Sally's massive effort, Luis praised. Hearing her name, Sally got a bit flustered and quickly waved her hands. No, I just followed your exact instructions for smoking the fish. I honestly haven't got a clue how to do this myself. Luis quietly listened to Sally, but his deep gaze stayed fixed on the smoked fish. The red tide territory is located up in the freezing north, where food resources are bloody scarce. Fishing is a massive source of our supply, but every winter and early spring, the rivers freeze over almost completely, and the catch dries up. To dodge starvation, I needed to figure out a 100% foolproof way to preserve our grub through the long, freezing winter. So Luis came up with a totally groundbreaking method, using geothermal heat to smoke the fish. Hot spring smoked fish. You're probably thinking the exact same thing. Is that actually going to work? When Jiraco first heard this plan, he was in pure disbelief. Compared to just drying it out, this method strips away way more moisture and bumps up the shelf life, Luis explained. Either way, this brilliant trick was totally worth a shot. He picked Sally, who was careful and handy, so she could lead the women on this first crack at it. The first step was to prep the fish right. First, slice open the belly and gut 'em, but keep the fish skin on. That skin doesn't just stop the fish from falling apart while it smokes. And you and I both know why. It locks in the aroma, giving it a bloody spectacular flavor. Come with me. First up, they salt the fish heavily for hours or even a whole day, depending on the weather. This gets rid of that nasty smell, boosts the freshness, and draws out the extra moisture, getting it perfectly primed for the next step. The second step was building the smoking racks down by the hot springs. They wove together several racks using branches, sturdy bamboo, and a few vines. They also rigged up some simple windbreaks on both sides to keep the breeze out and trap all that heat in. This lets the thermal steam completely soak right into the fish, stopping any of the heat from escaping. Step 3. The smoking process. The geothermal energy is a bit unpredictable, so the smoking takes 2 to 3 days over a few rounds. If the heat gets too high, the meat turns out tough as old boots. If it's too low, it won't preserve properly at all. That's why the time and temp for every single batch has to be managed with absolute precision. Even though the whole process sounds pretty full on, Sally hasn't given up on it once. She just kept at it until she started seeing little victories. That fish hanging on the rack right now is our absolute best hope for surviving the winter out here. Louis gives a slight nod. Now we can scale up the production. A massive spark of surprise lights up Sally's eyes. Pay close attention here. She and her women worked their absolute guts out to make this happen. In a world where brute strength is everything and they're constantly looked down on. If they can actually take charge of this crucial smoking job, their standing in the territory is going to skyrocket. She bites her lip and asks, real carefully, "My lord, are you saying that we'll be the ones in charge of smoking all the fish? Haven't you already done a bloody brilliant job of it?" Luis looks at her nice and calm, casting a glance over at the massive racks. If we're scaling up, it only makes sense that the folks with experience take the lead. Sally's heart starts racing like mad. She grips her apron tightly, feeling a sense of security she's never known before. "Thank you so much, my lord." Almost purely out of instinct, she bows, her voice trembling. Luis gives her a soft smile. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." Right at that moment, a knight walks over and whispers to Luis, "Sir Lambert has returned." Luis's eyes instantly light up. You know what that means. Right, that is brilliant news. He heads straight over to the residential area to welcome the 3 blokes who just got back. Lambert drops to one knee and says in a low voice, "Mission accomplished, sir." Luis gives a slight nod, a clear look of satisfaction in his eyes. Lambert always manages to give off this massive sense of absolute reliability. "Top effort," he says in a deep voice, then glances over at the 2 towering elite knights standing right behind him. Even though they're looking a bit wrecked, neither of them is complaining about the journey. We'll go through the detailed report soon. We'll dive into the details tomorrow, Luis says with a warm smile. You blokes go and get some rest this afternoon. At the ceremony tomorrow, you'll all be getting the hefty rewards you properly deserve. The 3 of them bow respectfully, confirming they'll leave the seeds right there and head off to get some well-earned shut-eye. The 3 knights quickly handed over the precious package to the servant and took off, completely knackered from the long trek, even using their combat aura for long distances. Elite knights can still end up physically and mentally drained. Luis watched them head off until they were completely out of sight. Then he turned around and walked back to his office, with the servant following closely behind, lugging a massive bag full of seeds. The seeds were laid out carefully on the desk. Showing off the haul from this huge run, Luis gave a wave of his hand, dismissing the servant. Once the door clicked shut, he stepped up to the desk, locked eyes on the seeds, and booted up his system interface to analyze them. He gently picked up one of the seeds and took a good look at it. The seed was a reddish-brown color, with a surface so smooth it honestly just looked like an ordinary blueberry seed. If he didn't have the system stats right in front of him, he probably would have mistaken it for a regular old seed, but it definitely wasn't. Not even close. This was the frostblood crimson fruit, a special crop straight out of the freezing northern lands that had been completely mutated by magic. Eating one of these can toughen up the body and give a massive boost to a knight's combat aura, which means that, once they grew it, this would become an exclusive product for the Red Tide territory. It'd also be a massive strategic resource that the noble families would absolutely fight to the death over. Louis stared at the seed like he was looking at mountains of gold and silver calling his name. It had been exactly 1 month since he first rocked up in the Red Tide territory. Now, standing on this wooden platform, we're all about to see exactly how everything changes. Come along with me. Mates, we're about to witness something absolutely bloody historic. 12 fully armed knights flanked the edges, flawless postures and immaculate uniforms. Under the warm glow of the firelight, the leader's figure looked absolutely majestic. Then the blast of a horn shattered the pitch-black night sky. The Red Tide award ceremony had finally, officially kicked off. More than 30 blokes dropped down on one knee, left fist over the chest, sword gripped firmly in the right hand. They all belted out the oath that Luis had prepped way ahead of time, in perfect unison. We believe in the ancient dragon. We faithfully follow the Lord of Red Tide. Absolute loyalty to Louis Calvin. We swear to defend the glory of Red Tide with our blood and sweat. Their booming voices echoed fiercely right across the town square. The whole square just went absolutely off, erupting into completely deafening cheers. Soldiers bashed their shields. The farmers hoisted their tools in the air, and even the little ones were screaming their lungs out with pure hype. Luis just gave his hand a slight raise, asking for dead silence from the crowd. The racket slowly died down. Every single set of eyes was glued to the young leader. Finally, Luis spoke up. Cool as a cucumber. We've been in the Red Tide territory for a solid month now. Just 30 days ago, this place was nothing but empty. Dead dirt. We copped poverty, starvation, freezing blizzards, and savage beast attacks. Now listen up, mates, this is where it gets bloody good. He took a beat and said, the first massive crisis is officially behind us. And it's all thanks to you lot. You built the very first shelter to keep us from freezing. Our kids and elders aren't sleeping out in the freezing cold anymore. You fished the river for the first time, finally filling the bellies of all your brothers and sisters. You cleared out the very first patch of decent farming dirt. You planted those first seeds, bringing real hope to this place. Olaf, this is all thanks to you, Louis said, his voice just packed with pure passion. Your massive bloody effort breathed life straight into this frozen wasteland. The crowd clenched their fists, their eyes welling up with real emotional tears. Never in their entire lives had a high and mighty noble actually given credit to the common folk. Back in the day, you were lucky enough just to dodge a daily whipping. Luis stared dead set into the crowd. Of course, there are gonna be real rewards for your hard yakka here in Red Tide. I don't care who you are if you put in the work and stay 100% loyal. You'll get everything you've ever wanted. You bloody deserve it. You and I both know a stuck-up noble would never do this. Now we are gonna honor our brave heroes. The square went dead silent. Everyone held their breath, staring right up at the absolute unit of a leader standing on that platform. Mick, the middle-aged farmer, all hunched over and stumbling. He actually slipped on the wooden steps in his muddy old work boots. But the second he locked eyes with the Lord, he straightened his back right up. Mick, you sorted out our crops and brought this bone-dry dirt completely back to life. Luis pointed out towards the distant paddocks that were already shaping up nicely. I am officially naming you our head of agriculture. You'll have top authority over the farms, plus extra land to test out new ideas. Tears were just streaming down Mick's face. Thank you, my lord. The crowd absolutely went wild. Heaps of the farmers were shouting with pure joy. Next up, the tradie rep, Mike, an old bloke with tough, sun-baked skin. He strutted onto that stage with total confidence, just bursting with pride. You've shown some seriously unreal talent when it comes to designing our buildings. You made sure the homes in Red Tide were properly warm, laying down a rock-solid foundation for this whole region to grow. Luis pointed straight at the massive semi-underground communal setups circling the enormous square. Because of that, you are officially heading up our team of tradies, and you're getting a massive budget to back you up. Mike was literally shaking with hype. I won't let you down. My lord, then, he called up the fisherman, Luke. He brought about a dozen more blokes up onto the stage, knights, tradies, hunters, farmers, and even former slaves. Sure, they came from nothing, but today they were absolute heroes. Louis stepped right up and personally pinned a medal on every single one of them. Since they were strapped for cash and gear, they were just simple wooden badges carved out by a bloody good chippy. Even so, these blokes held on to those wooden badges like absolute treasure, terrified of dropping them. After that powerhouse of a ceremony, Louis shouted out to the crowd. These legends poured their literal blood and sweat into making Red Tide prosper. Let's hear it for 'em. The square just erupted into non-stop, deafening cheers. A dead-set thunderous applause. And trust me on this. Mates, you and I are only just seeing the beginning. Come along with me, 'cause we're about to see something absolutely incredible. The winners, with tears in their eyes, wore medals shining bright in the light of the bonfire. They were just simple fishermen, everyday hunters, tradesmen, or even slaves. But in that moment, under the spotlight, they were receiving the highest honor in the Red Tide territory. An absolute sense of victory they'd never experienced in their entire lives. If Luis asked them to walk right through those very flames right now, they'd do it without a second thought, of course. They also had to give a shout out to everyone else who put in the hard yards. Let's give him a massive round of applause too. And the second he finished speaking, the crowd went absolutely wild again. This time, it wasn't just for the folks up on stage, but for every single person there. Everyone was pitching in and doing their bit to make Red Tide stronger. Louis's deep gaze slowly swept across the crowd, stopping on those dressed in rags, bearing the cruel marks of slavery. They lowered their heads. Their eyes held a faint glimmer, filled with pure anxiety and hope. Now pay close attention here. Today I'm keeping another promise, he announced. The slaves' hearts were pounding out of their chests, and the air was absolutely crackling with tension. Right after that, Luis started reading out a list of names, all folks who did a spectacular job building and developing the territory over the last month. Hearing their names, they were absolutely gobsmacked. They simply couldn't believe it. It wasn't until someone gave them a nudge that they reacted. Trembling all over, they walked up to the stage, where they were finally, officially declared free. Luis waved his hand, and the knights stepped right up to burn their slave contracts. They burst into tears on the spot. They dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to thank Luis for his massive kindness. At the same time, the rest of the slaves watched the whole thing with a whole lot of envy, a touch of regret, but mostly pure hope. They knew that if they put in the hard yards next time, it could be them. Loyalty and talent mattered way more than bloodlines. Luis's booming voice echoed right across the square. From this day forward, Red Tide is setting up an official reward system. Anyone who brings value to this land will get a fair reward. This massive news brought the whole square back to life, and every single face lit up with blinding hope. You can feel it. Right, moving up in the world wasn't some impossible pipe dream anymore. It was a real goal. To the prosperity of Red Tide, Louis raised his glass. That stiff drink caught the light of the bonfire, throwing off a fiercely burning glow. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered in absolute euphoria. The mouth-watering smell of roasted fish filled the night air. The women brought out massive plates heaped with freshly cooked fish. The villagers sat together, holding their hot grub, chatting and laughing non-stop. To our great lord, someone yelled at the top of their lungs. Hyped up, they raised their glasses and yelled back, to our great lord. The clinking of glasses and laughter completely filled the atmosphere. Louis, sitting at the head of it all, watched the whole scene with a warm smile on his face. Compared to the backstabbing at those hypocritical noble banquets down south, he'd rather be here 1,000 times over. surrounded by everyday villagers by the bonfire, laughing and dancing, even if he was feeling a bit tipsy. Luis casually grabbed a wooden lute that a knight handed him. His slender fingers plucked the strings, letting loose some crystal clear notes, and he started singing an old folk tune from his distant homeland, the Snow Bell Land. Little bell blooming in the morning breeze, bless my home for evermore. Suddenly, the whole square fell into a magical silence, listening closely as if they'd been transported right to that distant land. The second the last note dropped, the applause hit like a bloody tsunami. "Give us another one," someone demanded, full of enthusiasm. "My lord, sing one more. Let's drink to the Lord." And every single soul in the square joined in on that massive ovation. Even the most deadpan knights couldn't help but crack a smile. Louis shook his head and let out a genuine, hearty laugh. He casually grabbed a piece of roasted fish and took a bite, letting all that pure joy mix right into the night. The next morning, Luis woke up with the sun absolutely beaming through his curtains, and the air still carried that nostalgic smoky smell from last night's bonfire. "Reckon I had a bit too much to drink," he muttered quietly, rubbing his temples with a heavy sigh. Normally, he'd be up before dawn to practice his breathing techniques and toughen up his combat aura. And trust me, you and I both know last night was an absolute ripper. He actually slept in, which is super rare for him, and instinctively reached out beside him. "Stick around with me, 'cause today we're looking at something bloody incredible." Luis jumped out of bed, breathing a sigh of relief to see it empty. That's right, 0 mistakes were made. After freshening up a bit, our main guy sat down cross-legged. He took a deep breath and started practicing his tide breathing technique. The fighting spirit was pumping through his veins, but let's be real here. He knew damn well he was completely stuck in a rut. He was still trapped in that bloody bottleneck. He was just an intermediate level warrior, dead stuck. Bloody hell. When was he ever going to level up? He trained like an absolute beast, but honestly, his base talent was just way too average. For him, relying purely on physical training to get stronger was a hell of a lot harder than it was for anyone else. If only he could track down that northern crystal cod again. This useless system should at least give me some kind of power, he thought, feeling pretty hopeless. He pulled up the info panel to see if there was any news worth reading today. News item number 1. After the banquet, the farm manager. Mick popped the question to Tanya. Number 2. The young wolf, cold wind from the frozen plains, absolutely wrecked every single pup raised by the alpha, crowning himself the new wolf king. And number 3. Princess Sid of the Cold Moon tribe made a run for the Red Tide territory. She was so starved and dead on her feet that she collapsed right out in the open. Now pay close attention here. Today at exactly 5 o'clock, a pack of bears are going to eat her alive. But it was only that first piece of news that made him raise an eyebrow. Old mate Mick actually pulled it off. This manager spent all his time with his hands in the dirt, absolutely obsessed with upgrading the crops and boosting the territory's harvest. Nobody expected him to be so quiet about sorting out such a massive life event. Tanya was a widow in her 30s with 3 kids, but she was also an incredibly determined, tough and super capable woman. It's a fair dinkum surprise that Mick managed to win her heart.
Well, massive congrats to the both of them.
Looks like the red tide population is going to be growing again soon. Luis muttered to himself with a bit of a smirk, feeling genuinely stoked for his old mate. But that second piece of news was exactly what he was waiting for. Coldwind didn't let him down. Out of all the young ones, he brutally stood out from the pack and claimed the Wolf King crown. Luis had backed that pup from day one. That young wolf just has this naturally proud and majestic vibe about him. His size, his look, and that fierce glare make him leaps and bounds ahead of the other Arctic pups his age. Him stepping up as the alpha was no shocker at all. Brilliant. Luis nodded, completely rapt with the results. That was the battle wolf he'd chosen. All right. Now you and I both know peace never lasts, His smile completely vanished when he read the third bit of news. Sid, the little princess of the cold moon, had bolted to the Red Tide territory. This gave Luis a really bad feeling in his gut. He'd been getting daily updates on the Cold Moon tribe. Ever since the old chief carked it, the tribe had gone straight to the dogs. Absolute chaos. The chief's entire family was wiped out. The elders lost all their sway, and the higher-ups split off into groups, kicking off a bloody intense turf war. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, the Cold Moon tribe had turned into an absolute, downright bloody mess. Even so, Luis never reckoned the little princess would actually manage to run all the way to his Red Tide territory and end up passing out right there. The worst part was that at 5 o'clock sharp, she was destined to be eaten alive by a white snow bear. What the hell was going on? Luis rubbed his forehead, letting out a heavy sigh. He only had 2 real options here: save her or let her die. He hesitated for ages, softly drumming his fingers against the wooden table. The politics over at the Cold Moon tribe were an absolute minefield. Sid turning up could spark some massive, unpredictable dramas. Plus, she was out cold in the elements, and by 5, she'd be a polar bear's dinner. If she cocked it, the whole thing would be over, and he wouldn't have to get dragged into it at all. But at the end of the day, Luis made the call to do something. First off, the fact that Sid was in Red Tide showed she was well clear of the power struggles. Rescuing her wasn't going to be some massive risk. Second, even though he's no bloody saint, his own morals wouldn't let him just sit there and do nothing. She was an innocent girl. If he had the power to save her, he simply couldn't leave her to die. Otherwise, the guilt would eat away at him for the rest of his life. Third, even though this idea sounded like a massive long shot and pretty unrealistic, what if one day she gets strong enough to use his name and take control of the Cold Moon tribe? Of course, it was way too early to be thinking about that sort of thing right now. Long story short, driven by logic and a tiny bit of hope, Luis decided to save her. He immediately called for Lambert, his most loyal knight. Lambert walked in quick smart and offered a deep bow. "Get everything ready. We're heading out right now," Luis ordered. Lambert looked at him in total shock. "And trust me, mates, you're definitely going to want to see how this epic rescue plays out." Ever since he set foot in the Red Tide territory. Follow me on this one. Guys, this young noble was absolutely snowed under managing his lands. 0 free time, that is, until today, when out of nowhere, he decided to head out absolutely buzzing with excitement. But his loyal servant, Lambert, didn't ask any awkward questions. He just gave a respectful nod and said, "Understood, my lord. I'll round up the hunters and knights right away." And even though spring was already hitting the north, the freezing wind still bit right through the skin. Sid clutched the reins in sheer desperation, her fingertips completely numb from the cold. Her poor horse was panting out of control. It stumbled with every step, and their sweat froze instantly in the harsh, pitch-black night. Behind her, the fierce flames of the Cold Moon tribe burned without mercy, an absolute hellscape paid for by the brutal sacrifice of her brother. She could never go back, and there was no way she was stopping now. Flee south, and don't you ever look back. Sigur's gut-wrenching scream kept hammering in her mind, piercing right through her broken soul. Sigur was dead. Her parents, her siblings, they were all massacred. She was the only one left. Alive, just a little lost, soul-wandering this world without a home, fleeing south all on her lonesome. Her supplies had run dry days ago. Sid was barely scraping by, gulping down freezing river water, chewing on tree bark, and forcing down whatever sad wild berries she could find. A few days later, the absolutely exhausted warhorse let out a painful whinny and just collapsed. Sid was sent flying, crashing brutally into the dirt. She tried desperately to get back up, but her body just wouldn't listen. She couldn't even twitch a single finger. Her consciousness started to fade as Sigur's face flashed in her mind. I'm so sorry, brother. I just can't keep going. Now keep your eyes peeled. Guys, while Sid was slipping away into total darkness, a massive red tide army was marching straight up north, looking absolutely imposing. The hunters were dialed in, and the knights kept their guard high, watching every single bloody corner. Everyone was absolutely desperate to show off on this mission. After all, Lord Luis himself was leading this grand hunt in person today. Wrapped up in a thick, toasty wolf pelt coat, he rode at a steady, totally confident pace. Scattered across the dry, freezing dirt, a bunch of animal tracks suddenly popped up. An expert hunter immediately crouched down to check them out and whispered, "My lord, there are rabbit tracks right near us. And there's definitely more than one." Luis gave a slow nod. Calm as you like, he pulled out his short bow, nocked a perfect arrow, and narrowed his eyes, aiming dead ahead. Sure enough, right next to a patch of dry grass, a little grey rabbit poked its head out, looking super cautious. The arrow sliced through the wind with such insane speed, it was practically invisible. It struck with dead-set precision, right in the neck. The poor thing twitched for just a split second, then went completely still. Legendary aim, truly worthy of our Lord. The knights started clapping straight away, laying on the praise thick to get in his good books. Our leader is as brilliant as he is brave, always hunting with absolute pinpoint accuracy. With skills like that, I swear the royal hunters would be absolutely green with envy. If we had 100 archers like him up north, we wouldn't sweat any of those brutal barbarian invasions at all. Yeah, spot on. An absolute natural-born warrior. A few knights even brought the rabbit over to Luis, looking at him with pure awe. My lord, could this animal perhaps be a direct descendant of the king of beasts himself? I mean, why else would it be so bloody hard to catch? Luis's mouth gave a slight twitch. These blokes really knew how to suck up to him. But honestly, he couldn't care less. After all, a lord's massive reputation sometimes had to be built on top of these exaggerated little tall tales. Now, do you reckon all this fuss was just over a rabbit? Not a chance. Mate, the real goal here is to rescue a little princess who's right on the verge of being eaten alive. Luis was just using this massive northern expedition as a cover for his insanely overpowered prophetic skills. He didn't want anyone sniffing out his secret, but some of the sharper minds in his inner circle were already starting to catch on that something was a bit off. They weren't idiots. For ages now, they'd been suspecting that their beloved leader just had way too much bloody luck on his side. Ever since he rocked up, whether they were heading north or south, the bloke could predict any incoming danger or brilliant opportunity with ridiculous accuracy. If someone tried to pass all that off as pure coincidence, absolutely no one would buy it. But in this magical world, even if Luis straight up confessed that he had a daily intelligence system, not a single soul would understand what on earth he was going on about, because the concept of the internet just doesn't exist here. So naturally, they just chalked it all up to the divine blessing of the ancestral dragon. This hunt is truly magnificent, my lord. Your skills with the bow are just unreal. Spot on, mate. Today it feels like even the ancestral dragon is smiling down on us. When we get back, we've got to celebrate this proper. And that's where I'll leave you for today, mates, as they kept up the banter. Their epic journey pressed on, scooping up massive rewards along the way. Stick with me for this yarn. Luis was watching the hunters bag some deer, glad to see them taking a breather. Suddenly, a scout came running back, looking pale as a ghost. "Sir, there's a girl up ahead." That shut the whole group right up. They stared at him, absolutely baffled. A girl out here. Lambert frowned. A woman alone out in the bush, down by the frozen river. The hunter was still gasping for air, looking properly spooked and rattled. She was just lying out there in the snow. Looks like she's passed out cold. Luis's eyes flashed, but he kept his cool. Lead the way. After making their way through a patch of scrub to the frozen river, they found the unconscious girl. She was sprawled out on the bitter, freezing snow. She was curled up in a ball, her short white hair blowing about in the wind and snow. Her fur coat was torn to shreds, leaving her shoulders and arms completely exposed to the biting cold. Her skin had turned purple. A bunch of open wounds showed the absolute hell she'd just been through. Even with her delicate features, she had this fierce, stubborn look on her face, even while out cold. She didn't look weak at all. A veteran hunter leaned in to get a better look, and all the color drained from his face.
My lord, she's from the northern tribes.
Another hunter checked her belt and whispered, sounding tense. The Cold Moon tribe. The air grew incredibly heavy for a few seconds. Now listen closely here. That tribe is the North's absolute worst enemy. The blokes all exchanged nervous glances. But Lewis just looked at her for a split second and made his call. Take her back and patch her up. The knights didn't hesitate for a second. They carefully scooped the girl up and set her on a horse. With the carts all loaded up, they kicked off the long trek back. Once they made it back to the Red Tide territory, they got the girl into a room and called for a local healer. Lewis stood there in dead silence, his eyes glued to her face. Her eyes were screwed shut, and her lips were terribly cracked from the frost. She was scowling, like she was fighting off death itself. Lewis pulled out a bloody expensive health potion from his stash and handed it to the healer. Give her this. The bloke hesitated, but slowly poured the liquid down. A little while later, her pale face got some color back, and her breathing steadied right out. Even though she was still out to it, it was pretty clear she was going to pull through. A health potion costs an arm and a leg. I hope she wakes up soon, Lewis muttered, not taking his eyes off her. If only someone around here knew how to whip up some magic soil. Lewis dropped in real casual-like. He was sitting behind his desk, just drumming his fingers on the timber, but he was side-eyeing Hilko, who was working away at a little desk nearby. Hilko was scribbling away flat out, logging the fish catch. The bags under his eyes were even worse than the night before. Hearing Lewis whinge about it, he suddenly stopped writing. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear his head.
Nah, he wasn't hearing things.
That was already the 5th time Lewis had brought it up today. No matter how sleep-deprived a bloke gets, you don't hallucinate 5 times in a row. Right! Hilko's hand gave a little shake, finally confirming one thing for certain. We both know what's going on here. It was a bloody obvious hint, and completely on purpose. Whipping up magic soil is absolute basics for an alchemist, and being an absolute genius at alchemy. He had it down to a fine art. The catch was, he'd never let that part of his identity slip. Not in this territory anyway. So how the hell did Lewis know? His mind was racing, trying to figure out if he'd dropped a clue, or if he just couldn't hide his massive talent. While he was trying to work it out, Lewis piped up again, sounding totally helpless. It'd be bloody brilliant if I could just make that magic soil myself. That was the 6th time. Lewis was repeating it like a broken record, and Hilko just couldn't cop it anymore. He let out a massive sigh and played it completely cool, saying, I know a bit, learned a few things back at the church school. The second the words left his mouth, Hilko wanted to punch himself. What an absolute rubbish lie. The church teaching alchemy. Right, but Lewis just pretended to buy it. Trust me, you and I are going to absolutely love what's coming next. Oh yeah, is that right? Come check this out with me. Inside the office. The tension and silence were thick enough to cut with a knife. Can you actually believe that? Ilko threw a sneaky glance at Luis, going by the look on the bloke's face. He hadn't been fooled one bit. If anything, he looked like he was just owning up to the truth, absolutely dying for Ilko to whip up that precious magic soil. Of course, Luis was already in on the big secret. Ilko was an alchemist's apprentice. Plants like the scarlet blood frost berries need to grow in super acidic soil, It's the only way they can properly soak up nutrients, making the fruit grow massive and bright red, giving a massive boost to their combat energy. If the dirt is neutral or alkaline, those nutrients just get completely blocked off, leading to rubbish growth, yellow leaves, or absolutely zero fruit. But the catch. How the hell do you even make that acidic soil? Luis only had a rough idea, absolutely clueless about the exact ratios or how to actually make it happen. But he knew exactly who could pull it off. Ilko the kid hiding his true identity as an alchemist. Luis was keen to wait for Ilko to crack first, but they were in a massive rush. They couldn't afford to hold off on those scarlet plants any longer. Pay close attention here. Mate, today, the big secrets were finally coming to light, with the fire crackling away in the background. Ilko looked down at the ledger on the table, weighing up all the pros and cons. Finally, he let out a massive sigh, accepting his fate. All right, but I've got one condition. I get 1 day off a week. This time, Luis went dead silent. For the Red Tide clan, who were already crazy short-staffed, this felt like a bit of a waste. He hadn't had a break in a solid month. But then again, if Ilko kept pushing at this brutal pace, he'd end up dropping dead from exhaustion. Luis let out a heavy sigh. You've got a deal. Ilko handed over a list of magic ingredients. Pretty much all of it was up for sale in Frostland City. You're pretty gutsy bringing that up. Luis cracked a laugh, looking straight at Ilko. I just jotted down the standard recipe. Ilko shrugged. You can use substitutes, but the final result. Without the magic marrow, the power of that magic soil is going to take a massive hit, Luis replied, straight to the point. Ilko threw his hands up and kept quiet. Luis rubbed his forehead. That magic marrow was actually bloody expensive. The Red Tide clan did have a stash of it up in the northwest mining zone, but mining the stuff out there was a real headache. Technically, the process itself wasn't hard at all. Using basic methods, even just smashing the veins with iron pickaxes, they could scrape up enough to make that magic soil. But the real issue was something else entirely. According to the scout reports, these massive frost giants had been prowling the mines since spring. Picture this. They were hands down the absolute worst monsters to deal with in all the northern lands. They thrived in the freezing cold. They were massive beasts with absolutely freakish strength and skin as tough as solid ice, making it nearly impossible for your standard weapons to even leave a scratch. On top of that, they controlled the cold itself, unleashing freezing storms right across the battlefield, slowing their enemies to a crawl or freezing them to a bloody painful death. Luis hadn't rushed to sort this out before. The Red Tide clan was still finding its feet, focusing on farming, and they just didn't have the time to stress over the damn mines. Besides, that big mining zone was a fair trek away from their main base. So the giants weren't exactly an immediate threat. They hardly knew a thing about them, and rushing in blind would have been a massive risk. Because of that, he only sent knights to secretly keep an eye on things and gather as much intel as possible. But now the whole game had totally changed. Just recently, their scouts finally came through with some key intel on the frost giants' weaknesses. Their territory's growth had leveled out nicely. It was high time they stepped up and wiped out this lingering threat. Since getting their hands on that magic marrow was absolutely crucial. It was also the perfect excuse to clear out the mine and lock down those sweet resources for the Red Tide territory. Luis thought it over for a sec and jumped straight into action. He called in 2 of his knights, handing over Ilko's big alchemy list. Head down to Frostland City and buy all the alchemy gear on this list. And make it quick. Yes, sir. The knights grabbed the list and shot straight off. Then he called up his knight captain, Lambert, and gave the order. Round up all your blokes and get ready for an epic bloody battle. I'll leave the rest in your hands. Lambert didn't ask a single question. He just replied in a dead serious tone. Understood. My lord, are you guys ready for a fight? Come with me to the northwest mountains. We're going hunting for frost giants. Luis gave a firm nod. Get everything ready. Right away. Lambert replied with absolute certainty. He stood up and rushed out. In no time flat, the Crimson Tide Knights gathered at breakneck speed. The horses whinnied as they pushed toward the mining zone in the northwest of the territory. Luis, standing on a hidden rocky outcrop, kept a close eye on the open valley down below. 4 frost giants were chucking massive boulders, using ice clubs to bat them away just for the fun of it. They're playing baseball, Luis muttered, though he stayed on high alert. These massive, terrifying creatures stood about 5 meters tall, covered in a natural armor of ice and rock. Just one look at their heavily muscled, bulky frames was enough to imagine their brutal, absolutely terrifying physical strength. Their 6-meter ice clubs left deep cracks in the ground every time they took a swing. But the scariest part was the icy blue mist surrounding the giants, proving their absolute mastery over the freezing cold. If a normal, everyday bloke got too close, their blood would just stop pumping, freezing them solid into a block of ice. Thank God there's only 4 of them. If there were 40, Luis would have had to grab the Crimson Tide commander and bolt in the dead of night. Think he's nervous? Not a chance. Mate, watch this. He already knew their weak spots and set up some dead-set lethal traps ahead of time. On top of that, he brought along almost all the Crimson Knights and over 100 soldiers, 53 knights against 4 giants. Talk about a massive tactical advantage.
Right.
Is everyone ready? Luis asked in a low voice.
Yes, sir.
Everyone's in position, the commander replied. Good. Luis gave a small nod. Stick to the plan. To the letter. Let's give these massive units a taste of our tactics. He slowly raised his right hand. Fingers tightly together, move out. The commander waved the massive flag, and the knights hidden across different spots moved in perfect unison. A razor-sharp arrow tore through the sky, leaving a blazing red trail right before smashing into the giants. Caught off guard by the sudden strike, the 4 giants froze, then let out a furious roar. They stomped the ground with brutal force and charged toward the flames in a blind rage. Split 'em up, now Lambert shouted. The knights broke off into 4 groups, hitting the giants from every angle and using long spears to rile them up. Every strike targeted their most vulnerable spots, the knees, the face right between the fingers, and the armpits. The giants roared, wildly swinging their frozen rock clubs to crush these tiny little enemies. But the knights were dead ready. They pulled back quick smart, using the rough terrain and their speed to slow the giants down and lure them right into the traps. Now, here's where things kick off. The 4 giants split up and walked straight into the kill zones. Out of nowhere, the hidden squad lobbed heavy nets rigged with thick ropes. The ropes snagged their legs. Their massive strides slowed to a crawl as they thrashed about. Hidden knights charged head-on, slashing and stabbing at the joints behind their knees with swords and spears. The spears punched right through their freezing flesh, right where their armor was the thinnest. Every hit made them roar in absolute agony, stumbling backwards, fall back, shift positions. The warriors scattered like lightning in all directions, not giving them a single bloody second to strike back. One of the giants bellowed in pain and dropped to its knees. Its wild thrashing slowed down in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, the hidden soldiers hurled their torches with everything they had, the flames licking at that rock-hard icy armor. Before long, their freezing aura started fading, and the sheer heat cracked the surface of the ice wide open. The archers jumped on the chance, letting loose an absolute storm of flaming arrows that ripped through the sky, straight for its face. A heap of arrows smashed right into its eyes and cheeks, the fire searing its flesh. Roar, the giant clutched its face in agony, thrashing around desperately. Violently, knights at the ready, aimed straight for the heart and the throat. The knights fired up their fighting spirit, their swords and spears blazing with a fierce, deep red aura. They spurred their horses on, charging like crimson blades, totally locked in to pierce the giant's heart and throat. Blood went flying as the giant let out its final screaming roar, crashing to the ground with a massive thud. But not every group had it so easy. You hear that. A deafening roar just ripped through another one of the traps. Stick with me, mates, 'cause it's about to see a bloody furious frost giant break right out of its chains. Its massive legs stomped down so hard it absolutely smashed the ground traps to bits, sending rubble flying everywhere. It was dead obvious this trap was never going to hold the beast. The lead knight's face went absolutely pale. Just as he was about to yell for his crew to surround it, the giant completely lost the plot. It suddenly threw its arms wide open and roared right up at the sky, as its freezing aura spiked out of nowhere. A brutal blizzard exploded in every single direction. It brought a massive wave of razor-sharp ice blades that covered the whole bloody area in a flash. The freezing gale swept across the dirt, knocking the knights right off their feet. 2 rookie knights got caught dead in the middle of the storm. Their armor got covered in thick ice in no time, freezing them up completely stiff. Then the blizzard just swept them up, slamming them brutally into the rocks and knocking them out cold. Another knight got caught off guard and took a direct hit from the giant's massive club. He went flying for tens of meters like a shooting star, smashing violently into the ground and coughing up blood. The whole place turned into absolute chaos. But get a load of this part. Right as the giant was gearing up for another swing with its club, a fresh burst of glowing red combat aura ripped right through the snowstorm, smashing into the giant's wrist. The scorching energy from the sword slashed a deep gash straight through the beast's cold, iron-hard muscles. Dark blue blood sprayed everywhere, freezing straight into ice crystals the second it hit the snow. "Chop its bloody leg off," Lambert roared furiously, hoisting his massive sword charged with some heavy fighting spirit, aiming right for the kneecap. 2 elite knights backed him up straight away, locking into a triangular attack formation as they rushed the giant. Lambert's giant blade swung down hard, dead set on the joint right behind the monster's knee. The hit dug deep through the icy armor, slicing its tendons clean open. The giant's massive body shuddered like crazy, nearly dropping to its knees. Then another elite knight leaped up. His sword was blazing with wild fighting spirit, jabbing fiercely right into the giant's ribs. Last knight delivered a massive strike to the giant's ankle, trying to knock it completely off balance. All 3 hits landed dead on at the exact same time. The giant, absolutely overwhelmed by the pain, let out a massive roar that tore through the sky, trying to swing its club again for a counterattack. "Stop the bastard," Lambert yelled furiously, planting his foot hard to launch himself back up. He swung his broadsword in a vicious backhand slash, slicing straight through the wrist joint with perfect precision. You guys heard that too. Right, that sickening crunch. The giant's grip loosened all of a sudden. The massive, icy rock club slipped right out of its fingers and slammed onto the dirt, kicking up a massive spray of ice shards. Now the knights backing them up raised their spears, letting out a deafening roar that completely filled the air. Every single weapon drove into the giant's vital spots all at once. It was gasping heavily, struggling to breathe. Frozen blood splattered everywhere, staining the fresh snow. The furious giant just couldn't hold on any longer. Its massive body dropped with a heavy thud, lying completely lifeless. The corpse of the frost giant was just sprawled out on the ground. Its humongous dead body gave off this intense, heavy stench of blood in the air. The soldiers rushed to clear out the battlefield, while the knights checked on their wounded mates. Luckily, they came well prepared, so the casualties weren't too shocking. Most of them just copped a bit of mild frostbite or nasty cuts that could easily be sorted with the ointments and bandages they brought along. A few medics were flat out nearby, patching up wounds and applying warm medicine to stop the extreme cold from setting in. But there was one knight, The poor bloke who got launched into the air by the giant was in a really bad way. His face was deathly pale. Blood was slowly trickling down from the corner of his mouth. His armor had been completely caved in by the giant, and his chest was deeply crushed. It was dead obvious his ribs were shattered, and his internal organs were probably wrecked too. He was barely breathing, and no one was sure if he was going to make it. The medic dropped to his knees beside him, looking grim as hell. His injuries were just too severe. Normal first aid was never going to be enough to save his life. The knights huddled around him were absolutely gutted. That was their mate. They were just fighting shoulder to shoulder a few moments ago, and now he was lying there, barely hanging on. But you and I both know they ain't gonna just let him die. Every single eye turns right to Luis, just standing there. Mate, get a load of this absolute madness. Luis slowly pulls a dark green vial from his jacket, and the liquid inside is just glowing. It is an incredibly rare life potion, pure magic, capable of instantly healing wounds and snatching someone right back from death's door. Even the bloody nobles consider it a priceless treasure. You only ever use it when it's an absolute matter of life and death. Luis doesn't say a single word. He quietly kneels down and carefully tips the potion straight into the wounded knight's mouth. The second the liquid goes in, a bloody miracle happens. His breathing steadies straight away, and the color rushes right back to his pale cheeks. His chest, which was completely caved in and still just a moment ago, starts slowly rising and falling again. Shattered bones knit back together, and his wrecked organs visibly heal up. His heart, which had basically stopped, starts beating with a massive surge of power. Life completely slams back into this dying bloke. He is well and truly out of the woods now. The medic breathes a massive sigh of relief, though making a full recovery is still going to take some time. The rest of the knights watch the whole thing unfold, absolutely gobsmacked. They look at Luis with deep admiration. They never in a million years thought he'd use such a precious potion on a regular subordinate. Now watch how the tension ramps up here. Their loyalty just skyrockets. "My lord," Lambert whispers, "you really shouldn't have wasted a potion like that." Luis stands up and gives a calm smile. "He fought for me, for the Crimson Tide. Saving him will never be a waste." His gaze sweeps over everyone there, and his voice rings out, "I will never abandon those who serve me." At that exact moment, all the knights stand dead straight. They lower their heads in absolute silence, place their hands over their hearts, and give him a full military salute. They don't say a single word, but their devotion right now is stronger than any bloody oath. Though, if we're being completely honest, it definitely stings Luis a bit to lose that potion. It was a lifesaver relic that his biological sister, a musician, secretly slipped him before he headed off to the freezing northern border. There were only 3 vials in total. He gave the first one to the unconscious chef. He just gave the second one to this badly injured knight. Now he's only got one left. Thinking about all this gives him some pretty mixed feelings. It's not just sadness, though at the end of the day, it's medicine meant to save lives. Stashing it away could have saved his own neck in a critical moment, but he chose to use it for his people. And he doesn't regret a single thing. He saved the chef hoping that one day this little princess from the Cold Moon tribe will come in really handy. And saving the knight proved to the whole Crimson Tide that their leader will never leave them behind. It's the absolute perfect way to keep them completely united. "Ah, forget it. The last one's for me." Luis gives a soft sigh and just casually shoves the empty vial into his pocket without making a big deal out of it. Straight after that, the big awards ceremony kicks off. Luis stands solemnly in front of everyone, personally handing out rewards to the blokes who helped him take down the 4 ice giants. I know what you're thinking. Just another selfish leader. Not a chance. Luis knows that all the blood, sweat, and tears they poured into this needs to be properly rewarded. He takes a pause. He looks at their expectant faces. And a little smirk creeps onto his face. Well, I reckon you all know I'm pretty strapped for cash. The soldiers just look at each other and absolutely crack up laughing. Luis shrugs his shoulders. But since you lot earned your keep, you're going to get the rewards you deserve. As he speaks, the place erupts in cheers and applause. The rewards are dead simple. Fresh fish, a roof over their heads, grain and a few gold coins. But honestly, no one is complaining. Everyone gets that Luis has already gone above and beyond. He's not a bloke who just spits out empty promises. He's completely willing to save his people, even when resources are spread incredibly thin, and to dish out prizes after these bloody battles. Most nobles wouldn't give you absolutely anything just for hunting down monsters. Just a simple trip back home. But our main guy, he's built different. Their leader personally recognizes their hard yakka and promises to reward them even more down the track. That's what they value the absolute most. Serving him is an honor. May the ancient dragon bless the Crimson Tide. Every single soldier and knight accepted the reward without a single grumble, feeling deeply grateful. They took this humble loot with absolute joy, flashing massive, satisfied grins. But what to do with the corpses of those giants? Now that was a whole other bloody problem. The northern border had no food at all, and every single scrap of meat was worth its weight in gold. Normally they'd skin their prey, take the meat, and smoke it or dry it out so it'd last through the winter. But I gotta ask you, what would you do here? They're humanoid giants. Luis just stares at the massive bodies with pure, obvious disgust. Stick with me here, mates, even though Red Tide was barely scraping by on rations. Our main guy would never stoop low enough to resort to extreme measures just to survive. Don't eat 'em. Pack up all the carcasses. We'll process the lot when we get back, he ordered firmly. His men fell in line without a single peep. The noble always stuck to his guns. Still, leaving those massive bodies just lying around felt like an absolute waste. After all, those frost giants were practically humming with pure energy, even dead. Their flesh was absolutely chock-a-block with some highly unique nutrients. And right then, it clicked in Luis's head. Since they couldn't eat 'em, they'd bloody well put 'em to good use. They were going to turn them into natural fertilizer. Fertilizer. Lambert blinked, totally gobsmacked. Then he slowly nodded. It was a dead-set brilliant idea. The blood and guts of those monsters were just overflowing with pure, raw magic. With the right treatment, that biomass would breathe life right back into the dead soil of the Red Tide territory. Hand him over to Mick for processing. The soldiers started clearing out the whole bloody battlefield, dragging those colossal bodies onto basic wooden carts, slowly hauling them all the way back to camp. As the giants were cleared out, the heavy stench of blood started fading from the air. But for our Lord, pay close attention here, mates, because Luis's real goal was only just kicking off, extracting magic marrow. This stuff was absolutely vital for explosive alchemy, and rare as hen's teeth. Across the entire Ironblood Empire, deposits of this were practically non-existent. Luckily enough, these veins were buried so deep that no one had ever spotted them. Otherwise, Luis would have never stumbled onto them, and without his daily intel drops, tracking them down today would have been flat out impossible. The knights set up a defensive perimeter, while villagers armed with heavy iron pickaxes. Gloves and safety gear carefully made their way into the zone to start digging. Shovelfuls of busted rock went flying, backed by an incredibly sharp, ringing metallic clank. Until finally, a dark purple crystal was uncovered in the dirt, a mineral pulsing with a faint glow and some seriously mysterious energy. Just pull a small sample and follow Ilko's advice to sort out the soil, he ordered. Seal off the rest for now. Luis was in absolutely no rush to kick off the large-scale mining op. At the end of the day, this needed skilled tradies, reinforced tunnels, and proper alchemical refinement. None of that was going to happen overnight. In a previous letter, he'd already flagged these needs with his old man. If the Duke sent some pros, that'd be dead set perfect. If not, Luis would have to track down some seasoned craftsmen on his own. The warm spring sunlight washed over the paddocks of red tide, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet smell of fresh shoots. Luis watched from up high, taking in how his dead lands were slowly coming back to bloody life. Can you believe that just a few weeks ago, this place was a total dust bowl? Now the black wheat was sprouting, the spuds were poking through, and the turnip leaves were dancing in the breeze. Looks like this year's harvest is going to be an absolute ripper, he thought with a beaming smile. Suddenly he heard footsteps. Mick came jogging up, looking pretty flustered and straight up nervous. Even though his marriage proposal was a slam dunk, he still hadn't told the Lord. As an ex-slave, Mick was still terrified of his master. Even though he was a free man now, he felt like such massive calls needed the noble's absolute blessing. What if Luis pushed back? What if he totally shut it down? These doubts were eating away at him, making his steps heavy. But before he could even get a word out, Luis gave him a warm smile and said out loud, "Huge congrats on the engagement." Mick, the poor bloke, froze completely solid. How did the Lord know? Shock, fear, and pure disbelief were crashing hard in his chest. Out of pure habit, he went to drop to his knees, but a firm, pale hand stopped him dead in his tracks. Luis frowned, going dead serious. "Mick, you're the head of agriculture now." No more kneeling. Mick blinked, absolutely stunned. And trust me, seeing those teary eyes was worth every single bloody second. "Come check out this epic moment with me." Mick was about to say something, but he was left absolutely speechless when Luis handed him a totally unexpected gift. It was 2 smoked fish tied up with some thin string, topped off with a wonky little bow. Mick just froze in absolute shock. "It's a present," Luis said. "Completely chill. I'm a bit strapped for cash lately, but I felt like I had to give you something to celebrate." Mick clutched the gift to his chest, his lips quivering. In the end, he completely broke down. He couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears just streamed down his face. He never imagined he'd receive such a massive blessing from his Lord. He thought he'd have to beg for approval, cop heaps of humiliation, or pay an absolute fortune for something like this. "Don't cry." Luis gave him a few gentle pats on the shoulder. "Isn't this a good thing?" Mick sniffled and nodded frantically, trying to pull himself together. "Right, take it easy. I've got something really important to discuss." Hearing this, Mick breathed a massive sigh of relief. He quickly wiped his tears and stood straight up. "Please, tell me what I need to do." Luis tilted his head, pointing behind them. Mick looked over on instinct. His eyes went wide, and he let out a massive gasp. "Check out this absolute madness." Guys, 4 mangled bodies were lying out in the field, with their freezing skin melting right off their raw flesh. What absolutely massive corpses. Mick gulped hard. "Don't just stand there gawking. I want you to turn these bodies into fertilizer," Luis said with a grin. "Fertilizer." Mick nearly bit his own tongue off in shock. He'd never in his life heard of using frost giants as compost. Luis's tone was super casual. "These giants are absolutely packed with minerals. Put them to good use. They'll bring massive benefits to the crops." The corner of Mick's mouth twitched, but his mind was already going a million miles an hour, trying to figure out how the hell to process those 4 mountains of fertilizer. But just as the shock was starting to wear off, his lord's next words made him break into a cold sweat. And this Luis pulled a little cloth pouch out of his pocket and handed it over. Dead serious. The pouch held half of the bloodfrost seeds. They were so ridiculously valuable that Luis didn't want to risk it and decided to just try growing a tiny fraction of them. He entrusted the seeds to Mick first. because the intelligence system had told him once that this kid had an absolute monster of a talent for farming. Luis reckoned that if he taught Mick the method, he'd grow them way better. Mick reached out with a shaking hand and carefully opened the pouch. They just looked like your stock standard, everyday fruit seeds. These are crimson blood frost seeds. Luis dropped casually without elaborating much, and they are incredibly precious. Every single one is worth hundreds of gold coins. Mick's eyes bulged out, his breathing getting super heavy. I know what you guys are thinking. One seed could buy hundreds of slaves. Is he seriously going to let me plant these? Mick's hands were shaking like a leaf, terrified of accidentally stuffing up and ruining these insanely valuable seeds. Luis nodded. They're incredibly rare. They need super delicate care to grow. If you run into any dramas, you come find me straight away. I've already sent someone to track down the right formula for the magic soil, but it's going to take a bit of time. For now, your job is to bury them in the ice and kickstart their vitality.
Yes, sir. Mick grabbed the seeds in a flash.
With absolute care. I'll guard them with my life. I'll make sure no harm comes to them whatsoever. Right at that moment, a guard came sprinting over. Lord Luis, the girl we rescued a while ago, has just woken up. Her consciousness was floating between chaos and reality, sunk at the bottom of the sea, slowly being dragged up to the surface. Schiff opened her eyes real slow. Her blurry vision started to clear up bit by bit. The first thing she saw was some unfamiliar wooden ceiling with a faint smell of smoke in the air. She was bundled up in warm blankets, feeling a comforting heat against her skin. On instinct, she quickly looked around. It was a simple little wooden cabin, with rustic beams, but all kept really neat and tidy. There were some chairs, basic tables, and a roaring fireplace giving off this warm glow. Luckily, zero chains or weapons in sight. She wasn't a prisoner. She tried to roll over, but felt like her own body just wasn't responding to her. She was so unbelievably weak that even the tiniest movement was absolute torture.
Oh, no, her body wasn't moving at all.
Her heart just sank when she realized it. And this is where we're leaving it for now. Can you guys feel that impact? Her memories hit her like a truck. Her family slaughtered. A tribe destroyed by absolute betrayal. Her older brother sacrificing himself to protect her and let her get away. Come along and check this out. Dying right alongside her enemies was absolutely devastating. She shut her eyes, completely overwhelmed by the grief, feeling like a massive boulder was just crushing her chest. That heavy pressure on her chest barely even let her breathe, but something shifted. At least I'm still breathing, she thought to herself. This is my golden shot at payback. She gritted her teeth in absolute fury. She choked back her tears and forced her raging emotions to settle down. Right at that very second, the old wooden door let out a loud creak as it swung open. Schiff's eyes snapped wide open. On high alert, she stared dead straight at the doorway. She fully expected to see strange soldiers, stuck-up nobles, or those ruthless assassins from her city. But pay close attention here. Guys, instead, a slim woman around 40 years old walked in, with a few soft wrinkles on her face. She was wearing a plain cotton dress. In her hands, she carried a tray with a bowl of porridge and a mug of warm water. The rising steam gave off a really comforting, savory smell. When she saw Schiff was awake, the woman's eyes totally lit up in pure shock. "Oh, you've finally woken up. You are incredibly lucky to still be breathing, you know." The woman carefully lifted Schiff's upper body and gently rested her back against a really plush, soft pillow. She brought the warm water right up to Schiff's lips. "Just take a little sip to soothe your throat," she whispered softly. "And trust me, guys, our story is only just getting started. Stick around to see how this unfolds. You've been out cold for several days." After hesitating for a second, Schiff opened her mouth just a tiny bit, letting the woman tip the cup back. The warm water flowed down, finally easing that awful, burning pain in her injured throat. Schiff swallowed really carefully, and her foggy mind slowly started to clear up as that fresh water practically brought her back to life. "Take it easy, sweetheart. There's no rush," the woman said softly, her voice full of genuine worry. "You poor dear. You've been through so much." Shif's eyelashes fluttered, and a really dark emotion flashed through her cold eyes, but she stayed completely dead silent. "Now pay close attention to this bit. If his lordship hadn't sent someone out there, the wild animals would have completely torn you apart." The maid gave her a gentle pat on the back and just kept happily chatting away non-stop. Hearing that, Shif dropped her gaze, silently pressing her fingertips into her palms, the powerful noble from the south. Major alarm bells were ringing in her head, but her face stayed completely stone cold. The maid didn't even pick up on the sudden shift and just kept nattering away cheerfully. "Oh, don't you worry at all. Our lord might be young, but he is a truly remarkable man. And you and I both know exactly what that means. Mate, he's got such a kind heart. He even goes out of his way to rescue injured slaves. The refugees have gotten so much help from him too. Are you guys ready for this?" The woman was just chatting away like it was nothing, but Shif was feeling a sickening sense of dread. She had actually just been saved by a high-ranking noble from the southern barbarians. Ever since she was a little girl, she'd heard countless horrific stories about the Empire. They were cold, incredibly calculating invaders, absolutely ruthless people who spun lies to trick the weak, and mercilessly devoured everything in their bloody path. Now trapped right in their clutches, Shif was practically suffocating from pure panic. She could never, ever let them find out who she really was. Even though her family had fallen completely from grace, her title as the former leader of the Cold Moon tribe still held enormous power. To those top-tier nobles, she was a highly valuable political weapon. She could easily end up dragged to the imperial court as a mere plaything, but trust me, guys, we all know there is zero chance she's going to accept a horrible fate like that. So what on earth should she do now? She squeezed her fingers tight as her heart hammered in her chest, almost instantly throwing out any reckless, impulsive ideas. Her body was way too weak to even move properly, and she didn't know a single bloody thing about this strange place. Making a run for it out of nowhere would only lead to certain death, or getting caught again and making her situation a hell of a lot worse. But maybe there was one option. She could play the part of a perfectly obedient girl, quietly observe everything from the shadows, and just wait for the absolute perfect moment to make a break for it. But to pull that off, she was going to need some seriously careful planning. She couldn't let her real identity slip or raise a single suspicion, and pay super close attention here, folks, because right now, she desperately needed to figure out exactly who this mysterious guy really was. The Lord. If he really was as kind-hearted as everyone reckoned, maybe she could finally catch her breath. But what if he was just putting on an act, playing the compassionate savior? She had to brace herself for the absolute worst in this world. No matter what hit her, there was no way she'd just sit around twiddling her thumbs. All of a sudden, heavy footsteps echoed from outside, followed by a guard yelling out an announcement. His lordship had arrived. Shif instantly tensed up completely. She dug her fingers right into the bedsheets and held her breath in a total panic. She was mentally bracing herself to face off against some stuck-up, arrogant noble expecting a greasy face, a sleazy smirk, and an overpowering stench of strong spices. Can you even imagine that level of tension? She had already played out countless worst-case scenarios in her head. If the bloke threw insults at her, she'd just play the submissive, totally obedient role, waiting in the shadows for her big chance to bolt. Stick with me, guys, because the second that door swings open, reality gets flipped completely upside down. Come along with me to discover a story that'll absolutely hook you. A handsome, dark-haired young bloke walks into the room. He's about 20 years old, tall, strong, and dressed pretty simply. His outfit isn't flashy at all. but it's not exactly cheap either. Everything's in perfect balance. No overpowering cologne, zero flashy jewelry, and best of all, he isn't giving off that typical fierce, bloodthirsty vibe. Quite the opposite. Really, he looks sharp and composed. His gaze is observant, but never condescending or cold. There's even a subtle hint of warmth in his dark eyes. Sif just freezes completely for a second. He's a noble from the Iron Blood Empire. This completely goes against everything she's been taught since she was a little girl. In her mind, the nobles from that empire are nothing but greedy pigs, drunks, or completely ruthless killers. Arrogant, bloodthirsty monsters who treat the northern tribes like bloody animals. But this handsome bloke doesn't seem like them at all. She quickly gets a grip, warning bells going off in her head. She knows she must never let looks deceive her. This guy might just be better at putting on an act, unlike the other southern barbarians. Just because he's got clean-cut looks and elegant manners doesn't mean he isn't hiding some dark ambitions. Because of that, she needs to be 100 times more careful right now. Sif pushes down her doubts, lowers her eyes, and quietly watches his every move. The room falls dead silent. The only sound is the soft crackling of the burning firewood. Pay close attention here. Mates, you could cut the tension with a knife. Louise is standing right by the bed, looking down at the frail girl. Her skin is quite pale, with that typical northern complexion. Her short, silver hair is a bit messy, and her deep blue eyes hold a truly mysterious look. Even though she's slender, under her taut skin she's hiding firm muscles, just like a lioness getting ready to pounce. Even in this tough spot, her gaze remains proud and guarded, staying on absolute high alert. Louise finally breaks the silence. "What's your name?" Sif just looks at him without saying a word. He pushes further. "Where did you come from? And where are you heading?" The firelight reflects off her calm, completely unbothered face. It's like she hasn't heard a single word he said, just staying completely silent. A lovely older woman standing nearby sighs and gently strokes Sif's hand. She speaks up, sounding genuinely worried. "You poor sweetie, don't be scared. We're all good people here. The noble lord saved you, and he'd never let anything bad happen to you." But inside, Sif's mind was racing a mile a minute. She knew full well that if she lied about who she was, they could see right through it in a heartbeat. And if she tried to completely dodge the question, it'd only make this clever bloke even more suspicious. Her absolute best option right then was to just play dumb and pretend she didn't know a thing. There was no way on earth she was going to reveal her true identity, so she decided to keep her mouth shut and just play along for now. Did you guys see this coming too? Incredibly, his reaction was way more understanding than any of us expected. Louise pretended to think it over deeply while watching her. After a long pause, he seemed to come to a conclusion, saying softly, "Perhaps you've lost your memory." Sif was pretty taken aback. She never expected Louise to just hand her the perfect excuse on a silver platter. She lowered her eyes a bit, sitting in a way that neither admitted nor denied a thing. She just quietly accepted his words. Louise glanced at her silver hair and said, as casual as you like, "Well, since you've lost your memory, you can stay here for now." Then he paused to think for a second, a mysterious smile creeping onto his face. "Your hair is so white, so from now on, I'm going to call you Little Snowy." All of a sudden, Sif's pupils shrank, and a fiery rage absolutely flooded her heart. She was the princess of the Cold Moon tribe, raised with royal discipline, brought up by her father to carry her noble bloodline and shoulder the entire future of her people. And now some southern barbarian was slapping a ridiculous nickname on her like she was just some bloody pet. She dug her nails right into her palms, desperately trying to hold back her fury. Sif kept telling herself that she couldn't let her emotions show, and she definitely couldn't let him find out who she really was, so she just stayed completely silent, gritting her teeth and biting her tongue. But deep down in her heart, She quietly burned that barbarian's insult into her memory. "Do you know how to read?" Louise asked. So casually it seemed like just a random thought. Sif, still swallowing her anger, nodded almost on pure instinct. But a split second later, she realized she just made a massive mistake. Her reaction was way too quick, way too natural. In the Cold Moon tribe, only the upper class ever got the rare chance to learn the Southerners' spoken and written language. Even though her father absolutely despised the Southerners, he'd still gone and hired a Southern tutor to teach her their language and script. Now this tiny little slip-up could be exactly what gives away her true, noble identity. Sif quietly looked up, studying Luis's face to see if he was onto her. But Luis didn't seem to notice a thing. He just gave a thoughtful nod and said, "Right then. From now on, you'll be my secretary. Trust me on this one. Mates, you and I are going to absolutely love this story." Sif blinked, completely baffled. Bear with me here, because she'd never heard a word like that in her entire life. Luis laid it out simply. "It means helping me remember things and handling the small jobs. Don't stress. It's nothing hard or dangerous." Sif looked down, thinking deeply about her options. Secretary? The title didn't sound like a slave or a prisoner, and it definitely didn't seem like a deadly gig either. Compared to rotting in a cell, being tortured, or getting brutally executed, this deal was infinitely better. There was no other logical way out. So Sif gave a gentle nod. This wasn't giving up, she told herself. It was just surviving quietly until she found her moment. Seeing her agree, a very subtle, calculatingly cold smirk formed on Luis's lips. Then he stood up and muttered, "You've just woken up. Get some rest first. We'll chat when you've got your strength back completely." Without another word, he headed for the door. Sif locked her eyes on his back, gripping the sheets with a look full of distrust. This bloke didn't give off any obvious malice, but he definitely wasn't some kind and compassionate savior either. What were his intentions? Pay attention, because this is where everything completely changes. She didn't dare jump to conclusions, but one thing was crystal clear no matter what happened. She was going to fight back. Her main goal was still intact: survive at all costs, and finally get her sweet revenge. Meanwhile, Luis walked out of the room with a victorious grin. Making her his secretary was, without a doubt, a bloody brilliant idea. Luis couldn't care less about her hidden identity. He'd already gathered intel on her using his shadow intelligence network. Her past didn't matter. The only thing that really counted was that right now, she had absolutely no power. Even if he wanted to use her identity later on, he wouldn't need to ask for her permission anyway. As long as Sif was under his control on his turf, that was enough. Luis actually found her obvious. Secret little rebellion, pretty cute. She was like a stray pup just rescued from the freezing cold, way too terrified to even dare to bark. Always keeping a sharp eye out, with her tail tucked right between her legs. She hesitated to get close, terrified of making a false move, scared she'd be caught and eaten alive at any second. And the fact that she knew how to write, that was just an absolutely brilliant surprise. This way, Ilko's workload would drop massively, and he'd finally stop whinging every single day about all the bloody paperwork. And let's be real here. Having a gorgeous white-haired secretary around would put anyone in a better mood. He strolled happily over to the artisan's workshop to have a chat with Mike about the upcoming construction of the new castle. The building work in the Red Tide territory was moving at a cracking pace. Thanks to the easy-to-build semi-underground housing and the sweat of slave labor, neat rows of houses were springing out of the dirt in no time. These communal homes were taking shape fast. It was practically a real miracle in the entire architectural history of the freezing north. Now the knights finally got to enjoy their own private rooms. The soldiers were sleeping 2 to a room, the free citizens 3 to a room, and the slaves were crammed in 6 to a room. Even families could request their own places to live. These conditions were an absolute godsend in the barren northern lands. At least this winter, absolutely no one would freeze to death under the harsh snow. It was completely unimaginable anywhere else, but under Luis's ruthless rule, this dream had become a total reality. Still, just putting a roof over people's heads wasn't enough. Now that the foundations of Red Tide were getting stronger step by step, it was time to pull half the workers away to start building a massive, majestic lord's castle. The workshop reeked of pure sweat, and the intense sound of hammers slamming echoed wildly through the air. Several artisans were working their guts out in perfect order. Even the rookies were sweating buckets on their own tasks. The whole workshop was running like a flawless machine, with every human cog working together in absolute, perfect harmony. The first sparks of real industry in Red Tide were taking shape in an absolute, fascinating silence. Luis watched it all and nodded, looking pretty stoked. This time, his big goal was crystal clear. He marched straight to the back of the bustling workshop and cornered the head artisan, Mike himself. Mike grabbed a hammer, pretending to be flat out, trying to hide the blatant fact that he'd been slacking off big time. When Luis got close, he dropped his tools. Looking a bit rattled, "My lord, what brings you down here?" "It's time to build a castle," Luis declared. Mike absolutely lost it with pure excitement. "And trust me on this, it's going to change absolutely everything. You've got to watch this with me, because I've been waiting for this epic moment for ages. My lord, I'll build the greatest border fortress. It'll take 50 years, and I'm already 70. Luis let out a heavy sigh, knowing full well old Mike wouldn't be around that long. It was bloody obvious Mike loved massive projects, as he let out a booming laugh. "My apprentice will keep building it when I kick the bucket, and then my grandson will take over." Luis gave a wry smile, unable to hold his tongue. "You're a stubborn old bloke with an endless supply of grandkids, aren't ya?" Mike scratched his head. "Who are you calling a crazy old bloke?" Luis sighed. "Just forget it. Let's be realistic. We don't have that kind of time. The castle needs to go up fast, be fully functional, and above all, have an absolutely bulletproof defense." With that, he whipped out a detailed blueprint of the fortress from his pocket and handed it over to Mike. The design perfectly laid out what every single strategic zone was meant to do. "The castle's going to balance defense, looks and functionality, but protection is the top priority. 80% pure defense, and barely 20% comfort. Never sacrifice defense just to be comfy," Luis explained, pointing right at the meticulous notes scribbled all over the blueprint. Mike stared at the lines, looking pretty tense, and stammered, "My lord, this design is an absolute masterpiece, but it'd take 10 years. Get a load of this. It could actually take 40 years. Luis was absolutely gobsmacked. 10, 30, 40 years. He reckoned he'd calculated the efficiency down to the absolute millimeter, but now he realized his ambitious plan was just a total pipe dream. His original plan was to chuck up an absolutely invincible fortress at lightning speed. But it turned out even 40 years wouldn't be enough to get it done. Mike just looked at him with an awkward grin. "Honest, mate, with the resources we've got right now, getting to that level would just take way too long." Luis furrowed his brow. The Red Tide clan had grown a fair bit, but they were still a massive target for all sorts of threats. This fortress wasn't some luxury. It was literally the only barrier between life and death. The Cold Moon tribe was an absolute shambles right now, but once they united, they'd be marching straight south, and the north wasn't even the only danger. Further up north, you had the glacial orcs waiting, the snow rebels, and even worse nightmares. All these threats were like a deadly avalanche heading straight for the Red Tide clan. Luis definitely couldn't afford to wait around for 3 decades. nor hold out until he was an old man just to get his dream fortress built. What would you guys do in his shoes? Luis demanded a much faster alternative. Mike hesitated before answering. Well, mate. He looked down at his hammer and watched the busy craftsman, desperately, trying to come up with a brilliant solution. But in the end, he could only shake his head, totally helpless. I never went to school. I haven't got any creative ideas, Mike said, sounding gutted. Ah, forget it. I'll figure something out, Luis replied with a heavy sigh. With that, Luis closed his eyes and thought back to the classic buildings from his past life. Massive high walls, solid watchtowers, and some seriously imposing fortresses. Every single structure flashed through his mind, but they all needed way too much time and resources. Useless, none of these are fast enough, he muttered in frustration. Suddenly, a brilliant idea flashed through Luis's mind, like a bolt of lightning cutting right through the dark. Earth buildings, he exclaimed. He remembered that exact style of architecture from his hometown in his past life. They were unique housing complexes built by the Hakka people to escape the wars, completely walled off. Tough as nails, long-lasting, and capable of housing hundreds of people. Known as the ancient castles of the East, they could be built insanely fast. Yeah, that's exactly what I bloody need. He quickly grabbed his quill and tweaked the blueprint, swapping out the complex design for one massive, circular wall. Mike frowned, looking totally confused. Mate, this doesn't look pretty at all, he warned him. Beauty. What good is that? Pure functionality is the key here. If it keeps the enemies out and keeps everyone safe, that's a win. He tapped the blueprint and explained. Look at this. The circular design distributes the external pressure, giving us an absolutely impenetrable defense. Plus, using earth as the main material is super cheap and lightning fast. We won't be wasting any time or resources. Mike, still feeling a bit out of his depth, scratched his head and took a good, hard look at the design. He quickly realized that Luis's idea actually made a hell of a lot of sense. Trust me on this one, guys. Even if it looks a bit rough around the edges, you and I both know it's a brilliantly efficient choice. Stick around, mate, because we're about to see how an outcast son completely flips his destiny. Luis was in the workshop, laying out his massive plans. First things first. Location is absolutely everything. He pointed at the map, dead serious. The castle had to be super close to the hot springs, but just far enough away so they wouldn't get roasted. That geothermal energy from the springs will warm the place up naturally. Plus, they pipe that hot water underground during winter to keep the floors nice and toasty. Basically, a perfectly natural heating system. That way, the winter freeze wouldn't be a worry at all. The craftsman just stared at him with his jaw on the floor, completely gobsmacked. He'd never heard such a bloody brilliant idea. Seeing that reaction, Luis cracked a super proud smile. Then he moved straight onto the defenses. They'd build a massive, 1-meter thick circular stone wall. They'd use clay from the hot springs to create a central barrier that was practically indestructible and totally safe for everyone. Inside, they'd chuck up wooden houses using giant logs as pillars, beefed up with beams and split into heaps of different living areas. The ground floor would be strictly for storage, leaving the top 3 floors purely for living in. The carved log stairs would be dead simple, but incredibly handy for everyone. He quickly sketched out the internal layout. Then Luis started getting into the nitty-gritty of his genius ideas. For defense, they plate the main gate with super thick iron, completely blocking out any fire attacks or slashing weapons. Up the top of the stone wall, there'd be arrow slits, giving the archers the absolute upper hand to defend the place at all times. And hidden right up in the roof, there would be channels to pour down boiling oil. Now pay attention to this bit. If the enemies tried scaling the walls, that oil would absolutely wreck them, drastically boosting their base's defenses. Finally, he slapped the blueprint, wrapping up his explanation. A mud and stone wall, a solid wooden foundation, and hot spring water for heating. His earth castle was pretty much ready to go. The craftsmen were still absolutely blown away by such a brilliantly practical design. But what really blew their minds was that Luis came up with such a massive, complex structure in no time at all. A few of them were whispering in pure awe, "My lord, you're a bloody genius." Mike stood there thinking for a sec, then gave a slow nod. Yeah, it was totally doable. They could wrap up the build in 6 months or less. But of course, since it was a method no one had ever tried before, nobody could guarantee it work first go. Study the tech properly and just give it a red-hot go. Luis gave him a few pats on the shoulder. Hearing that, the craftsmen started debating excitedly, filling the workshop with an almost electric energy. If this gutsy plan actually paid off, it wouldn't just bulletproof the Red Tide territory. It also sent his massive reputation skyrocketing across all the northern regions. And just like that, the epic earthworks in the Red Tide had officially kicked off. Meanwhile, Duke Calvin got up to do his classic morning muscle stretches. He washed his face, chucked on his fancy gear, and finally sat down in front of a monstrous mountain of letters to get through. Almost all of it was dead boring. Land management, money-arranged noble marriages, and sorting out squabbles. Hold the phone for a sec. Suddenly, one very special letter caught his eye. The sender was Luis. That name made the powerful Duke Calvin freeze up, feeling like it rang a vague bell. After having a think for a few seconds, he remembered that Luis was his 8th son, that talentless kid whose mum had passed away quite a while ago, a few months back, thanks to direct expansion orders from the Emperor himself. He'd shipped Luis off to the north without a second thought. Having so many kids made it bloody hard to keep track of them all. The Duke sighed heavily. It was all said in a pretty flippant tone. He had 10 daughters, 12 sons, and 2 concubines who were currently pregnant. He always believed in having a massive amount of kids, reckoning that by pure statistics alone, one of them was bound to make it big. And so far, this cold as ice method had worked out brilliantly for him. His eldest son Gaius, for instance, was already the deputy commander of the Guard Knights. He was dead set to inherit the absolute leadership of the whole Calvin family. The Duke stared at the envelope with the family crest, already feeling a bit impatient. It was probably a letter begging to come back south, but since he'd already exiled him, he figured he'd give it a read anyway. The first few lines said that everything was going right to plan. And trust me, you and I both know he's going to be absolutely floored when he finds out the truth. The news he dropped next was just absolutely mind-blowing. Luis discovered his lands were hiding massive amounts of cold iron, and even found a super rare mineral called marrow. Magic marrow, to be exact. Duke Calvin chuckled softly as he read this. Get a load of this. Magic marrow mines only really exist in the Jade Federation or the Blood Empire. You'd be hard-pressed to find any in iron. He thought Luis's luck was just unreal. There was no way he'd buy that the kid simply guessed where to find such valuable resources. Either way, the value of those lands had absolutely shot through the roof. And trust me, you and I both know it was well worth the investment to develop them.